we've picked up the West Australian today. On the front, in the middle of it, there's of course, the AFL Cup. On one side's Pavlich, on the other side's Judd, and it says the finals countdown. What did you say?
It's heavy-duty stuff, isn't it? Well, I clicked in there and I thought, here's a kid from Subiaco, another one here from West Perth or something like that. And on the front, I thought, Matthew Pavlich. I'm sure he's an Adelaide boy. Chris Judd, we should get him back to Melbourne, particularly Collingwood, right now.
Yeah, the irony of it's beautiful.
Oh, that's quite good, yeah.
It is. Now, we were just, when we first came on air then after that song, you were just sitting here pointing out all the different cars to me. It's kind of like a menagerie, isn't it?
It is. Well, you're right. And well, the drivers are like they're from a menagerie, aren't they? Caged animals, letting them loose. Yeah, a lot of collectibles amongst them. Some of them have gone up exponentially in value in the last few years. A lot of people...
Well, folks, the Orange Thumb. Phil, are you right to go? Lewis?
Yeah.
Anne, you're okay?
Sure.
Andrew?
Yep.
Peter?
Yes, Glenn.
Where would you start a program such as this? Living life following your dreams? Maybe Lewis. You'd start with something like that.
Okay.
What can you tell me?
Hurstbridge Primary School, under 12, 1955. My dad actually filmed this race, and it was an athletics carnival between the local primary schools, and Peter won it. And on the video, which you'll see, he breasts the tape, walks around very proudly, walks straight towards the camera. Then later in it, he's interviewed and receives the trophy, and he's interviewed and he just talks to the microphone, age 11.
So he felt very comfortable even at that age,
yeah, and
in the spotlight.
too. Yeah, absolutely.
And was this a passion of his from an early part of his life in terms of competition? Is this something that you felt early days? Possibly, if you'd like to make a comment on this, Phil, that your brother was bound for greatness.
Well, it all came from our mother. She was an extremely competitive person, won Australian championships at tennis when she was in her 50s. And playing tennis, in fact, I was the only brother that actually beat Mum at tennis. They all gave up because they couldn't beat her.
But you never reminded her of that, did you?
I've reminded them.
Yes.
But no, she was very competitive, and I think that's where the major area where Pete got his competitive spirit from. Yeah.
Peter Daicos, you've won a trophy or two in your time. What sort of feeling do you get seeing a trophy of, goodness me, close to 50 years on, restored in that sort of condition?
Oh, well, certainly restored. Gee, someone's looked after it. It's fantastic quality. I haven't got anything of this ilk or quality, but, oh, look, there is a starting point for everyone, and I suppose as an outsider for myself, and probably not really going too deeply into Pete's background and certainly starting point, it's great sort of seeing this sort of stuff, because you probably get a bit of a snapshot or a bit of a glimpse into sort of the making of Peter Brock a bit. And I think you just sort of pointed out that the competitive side of things back in 1955 was, you know, emerging.
What do you see Peter Brock as in terms of your sporting prowess? Was he on the similar level to an AFL player? Was he above an AFL player or a tennis player or anyone else for that matter?
You know, it's not a hard one to answer, but in my case it is, because of the personal friendship. I don't think you can liken Pete or Brocky to an AFL footballer or similar. I just think that as a kid growing up, I mean, Peter Brock was a hell of a lot bigger than that, and you know, I think he was it's just probably a sad fact or a bad sad example, but he was probably the sport. You know, in that era when I was growing up, it was Peter Brock. It wasn't motor racing. It was Peter Brock that made motor racing, and at the end of the day, you know, that's where I sort of aligned it. So that, to answer it, he was a hell of a lot bigger than that.
No, disagree.
Disagree?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, well, but it's different eras, isn't it? I mean, and Peter's been amazed sometimes when he first met my brother and ourselves and what have you, and we were just going, "Hey, Dakes, come on, well, can we kick a footy with you or something?" And we were in awe of Peter Dakos. He was probably in awe of Peter Brock, but you know, but for different eras, you know, I mean, like the competitive spirit and not that much the excellence that they portrayed, and Peter on a footy ground. I mean, I saw Peter when he played in the seconds, and I thought, this kid's going to be good. And Pete said the same, and you know, and we love watching Dakes play. Now, we got as much enjoyment out of watching him play as Dakes probably did watching Peter drive. You know, so different eras, the same excellence out there, and that's the important thing, I think.
So, Peter, were you watching him drive?
Oh, for sure, and that's probably where I was coming from a little bit before. As a kid growing up, I wouldn't have called myself on a scale of 1 to 10. I probably was, you know, around the 6 as a petrol head. And but the thing is, I wasn't totally focused in motorsports, but I knew who Peter Brock was. And let's face it, I knew who he was, and it was nowhere near. The commercialism of the sport is nowhere near what it is today. You know, I definitely knew who he was, and I definitely had seen him race.
We actually went on to own one of his cars, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I did, and geez, I wish I still had it today. We were just talking about it before with Phil, but yeah, no, I had the great fortune.
1983?
That's right, the VH, and it was part of, or a spin-off of the Chariots of Fire when SS or Holden Special Vehicles got hold of the SSs, the VHs, and souped them up, and they were pretty much the start of all that era of you know, the cars that were being modified. And you know, again, I had a love of cars, and I was growing each year, and to get the opportunity to go down and meet Brocky was fantastic. I went down, and that's sort of when it all had started. He was actually part of the new Magpies, and was you know, part of the football club and the rebuilding and the reshaping of the football club in the early 80s. And so I had the great you know, luxury to head down, and as it turned out, a few months into the union, it was Pete's personal car, and it was a white SS, especially modified for Pete's own use, and he called me one day and said, "Would you like the car?" And I thought, "Do I have to pay for it?" And he said, "Well, of course you have to pay for it." And he's
spoken like a true footballer.
No, true Collingwood boy, I thought you were going to say. But in the end, I took up the offer, paid for the car, and it stood and took pride of place in my garage for about 3 years. I hardly used it, and we were just, as I was sort of saying with Phil, we were just talking about it with Phil in the sense that, you know, those cars have gone ahead and leaps and bounds. But for me to not only own a machine like that, but to own Peter Brock's car was amazing and something special.
Can I add
Please,
something there? Pete didn't do many kilometres in it, and he used to baby it around the place. And he'd come in sometimes going, "Oh, Peter, it's just not running properly. I don't know what's wrong with it."
I thought he gave me a lemon. I thought he'd sold me a lemon.
Peter jump in the car with him and just get up it and flock around. You see this grey and black smoke billowing out the back of one of it. And he'd say, "Dave, get up it, you know, play like you do on the ground." You know, it gets
give it a go.
quite funny, yeah. So it was a quick tune-up.
Yeah.
Let me share a quote for you. He had extraordinary talent, you know. I think he probably would have played football for Collingwood if he hadn't been a motor racing driver. He just had that amount of passion to succeed in sport. You said that, Lewis.
Yes, I said that. Yeah, and I really believe that. He was thinking of, he was certainly very good at sport, as that first trophy there attests to, but then he was considering, does he want to go into team sport or something where he has more personal involvement and more probably control over the end result. And I think he played in teams where maybe he felt the team let him down a bit much, and he just felt like he was confident enough to feel he could be the head of that team, the person who would drive the car, and he was confident with that. We had this conversation because I played football with Peter, and he loved it, and he was very good at it.
What position?
Centre half forward.
He was centre half forward.
He's centre half forward.
He was a Collingwood 6-footer.
Yeah.
He was a Collingwood.
11 and a half. Collingwood 6-footer.
and a very good thinker of football. Like, he was very good to play with. He'd sort of tell. I was more of a running player, so he would tell me where to go stand, and he'd go for a mark and punch it to me. Things like that. Like, he was very thoughtful about it. And he also wasn't such a good kick. Okay, kicking was a problem. He needed your skills.
Centre half forward. Wow.
Bit of tuition, yeah, but he was, you know,
Anthony Rocket.
he could have done it.
And would you ever have thought that Peter had that much sporting skill, or did you always just see him as a racing driver?
Well, certainly, I mean, my direct experience was just as the racing driver, but like when I first met him, he was, I think, 60 or close to, and we went up to Mount Buller and he went for a 10k run at altitude, you know, and I was just like struggling to get out of bed. So it kind of, you know, puts it all in perspective. You think, my God, you know, actually have to work hard to be that good at what you do.
Absolutely. Andrew, rogue punter here on our panel this evening. What are your thoughts with Peter Brock in terms of the athlete? This must more or less really change your perspective on a man that you may have seen as just the racing car driver.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear Lewis, and with the book that was recently released about all his sporting achievements and stuff like that, and I didn't really know much about it. And but I guess if you are, you know, very good at something like which requires an extreme amount of coordination, and you apply that to anything else in life, so he just went at everything 100%, which is what I respected about him. And yeah, he was just an amazing. I just saw him as an amazing driver, and yeah, all this other stuff. It's a little bit sort of surprising, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense.
What was his sporting weakness, Lewis? Did he have an Achilles heel, something he just couldn't do? Swim?
Oh, he couldn't do golf.
Golf.
He was shocking at golf. He actually played with Ian Baker Finch in a Pro-Am celebrity tournament, and he walked up onto the first tee with Ian Baker Finch, drove a beautiful shot, and he came up for the next shot, drove a beautiful shot straight down the fairway, turned around to Ian Baker Finch and said, "How good's this? This is easy." And then from then on, he just proceeded to spread them everywhere. So,
well, Ian Baker Finch, if I'm not mistaken again, he was a HGT aficionado.
He had
What sort of car did he have?
Turbo Calais.
He had a Turbo Calais.
We done work 2 years.
There's a little bit of cross sports happening here, and speaking of cross sports, that's it's almost a a number for the ages, I think, really. It probably surpasses many of the great footballing numbers. 05 on the back of a Collingwood jersey. I'm not sure, Peter, if that's a little bit even before your time in terms of when the original jumper was presented to Peter, but maybe Phil or Lewis, you could take us back to that time where Collingwood did a promotion and the 05 jersey was presented to Peter.
I think that would have happened around the time of the new Magpies, I would have thought.
It may have, and I know there were plenty of presentations to Pete at the club anyway, so it would have been one of many. Not so much this Guernsey, but certainly the 05 in Collingwood Union was born back when
I thought it might have
the
been
new
later
Magpies.
because we got the Emirates, which hasn't been, and also it's AFL, not VFL.
Well, I know
I'm not too
from
sure, but
my thorough research that there was actually back in the day, I'm pretty sure it was back in the actual inception of 05, that the Collingwood Football Club doctored up a jersey and presented it to Peter to...
well, certainly not that one, is it?
Not that one. But
No. Oh, well, there was a photo with Ray Shaw.
Correct.
And there was a,
So that'd be
that's right.
75. Which is
76, I think,
76?
76 around there, 76, 77 around there, I think, yeah. But that's right, but there were many presentations, and but I know of one even through the 80s when Peter was part of the new Magpies, that there was, again, the coming together of the 05 and the black and white colours.
Was he a regular in the rooms?
Oh, yeah. And look, and to his credit too, and you know, Peter sort of, you know, for the people that knew Pete, knew that, I don't know whether it was not wanting to encroach or whatever, but he sort of, he had his own little space, and I know at Waverley many times I'd sort of look across at the supporter base, and as a player, as a sportsman, as a player, you're always sort of focusing in on the game, and but I'd sort of always have a glance over it to see who was allowed into the rooms, and there wouldn't be too many people, but you know, there'd be, you know, 6, 10 people, and right at the back of that crew you could see Pete, and he'd just sort of come to the front and he'd sort of give you the acknowledgement, or you'd go over, and you'd remember how they'd be barricaded in a bit, but you'd still have that ability to communicate and touch and sort of be around the people, and he wouldn't be too far away. It didn't happen every week, but it was great. And then after the games, and as Lewis was saying, and Phil was in the rooms plenty of times as well with Pete. He had a good knowledge, and I'm not just saying it because of what we're doing here. He was a football lover, and he had a really good handle on, you know, the motivations and probably just the tactics of a game of football, which was really good.
You know, when we were doing the Australian Safari, which was in August, you know, a couple of years ago in August, every time we got to a meal break or at the end of the day, and it was, you know, the appropriate football playing day, he had to know what the scores were doing.
Yeah,
he had to know.
How the wood's going.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Didn't he once take off from Sandown qualifying, sped around, put it on pole, and then he went off to Waverley, watched the footy, watched the Pies.
That's right.
Yeah.
But didn't he? And he always used to be, always had the crew, the pit crew, always holding up the scores.
Oh,
Yeah, people thought it was the times, and you know, weren't too good at times, but it was actually the score of the footy, you know. So
So was he there in 1990?
look, I've got no doubt, and look, to be quite honest, I can't recall because we're going back quite a few years ago now. You know, again, you know, you're so focused on the game, but I know he wouldn't have been too far away. He would have been at the game. He would have been at the game without.
He was definitely there because actually it was probably not that long before his passing. We had a conversation about Collingwood premierships, and he's been to
That would
every
have been
one.
a very short conversation.
He's been to every one's 53, 58 and 90. Yes, he's been to all of those. He was present.
So, Dakes, any other thoughts on Peter Brock, the man?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, I have been quite fortunate, and I know a lot of people have heard me say it before, but, you know, for me as a kid growing up, I mean, Peter Brock, you know, was something special, you know, and was a sporting icon, you know, for a kid growing up, you know, sort of wanting to, you know, sort of hit the heights. You know, for me to, you know, have had the chance to meet him, you know, was always, and I remember getting the opportunity to meet him, and I'd heard a saying once that, you know, you should never ever meet your boyhood idols or sports stars or heroes, because...
How old were you?
When I met Pete,
First time.
got to think about this, 22, 20, yeah, 21, 22, and they say because they've got a way of, I suppose the expectation you have of them sometimes can be let down a little bit. Well, that was never the case, because, you know, and quite honestly, you know, we all have flaws and cracks that appear at different times, but I can honestly say that in all my time, having known Pete and been around him at different times, and whether time had slipped by and I hadn't seen him, his demeanour was always the same, you know. And the thing is, he'd always approach you. You know, I'd always feel like I had to sort of hold back at times and, you know, not to bother him, and no, he was always first across the room, and he was terrific at allowing people to get their word in, and he wanted to know more about you than, you know, yet you wanted to return a compliment. I wanted to be talking to him and ask him 100 questions, but that wasn't the case. But, you know, I can honestly say that, you know, that in all my estimations of him, I mean, they just went through the roof after that. I mean, it never ever changed, and he didn't let me down in that instance. And, you know, for me, you know, having you know, being involved in football, one of the great things afforded to me has been the ability to meet people, and, you know, I can say that, you know, not only met Peter Brock, but he was my friend, you know, and people like Ron Barassi and things like that. I can say that I have friendships with him, which is just amazing for me.
And Lewis, maybe Phil, before we allow Peter to leave us, any thoughts maybe back to Peter that one P. Brock might have had around Peter Daicos, the person,
Well,
Peter Daicos, the footballer?
You've seen, I think, Peter's shots of goal in the elimination final, preliminary final of 1990, where he puts it on the side of his boot and kicks it from the boundary line, and people were just like, he's revolutionised football. And you did, Peter. And Peter Brock recognised that. I think that's a respect that you're held in. People do it a lot today, don't they, what you did? But you were just someone out there doing it for the first time. I think in a lot of ways there's a lot, what Phil said is true, there's a lot of similarities between you two. I mean, you took a step that was right out there in football, in ball skills and so on, and Peter, I think, took motor racing to another level as well, so, you know.
You know, and I can say, and I can go on record here, officially saying that I probably learnt a lot of those kicks in the workshop, Phil, at North Knoll. Would that be fair to say? We, you know, not unlike this, yeah. You know,
how do I get around there? I've got to get around that car.
Right. And that's the other thing is when I did go down there, he was so open to it, and for me, you know, like he sort of. The ability to take you in was just fantastic, but we'd kick around the workshop and you'd have all these expensive cars there, and, you know, people were paying a fortune to get these cars remodified and HDT and or special vehicles, and, you know, we'd be bouncing off the roof of cars and off bonnets and scoops and you name it. And I'll always remember one time, actually, it was really interesting. It was early 80s, and you talk about revolutionising, you know, in your chosen occupation or whatever. I'll always remember heading down to the workshop, and the beauty is he'd always greet you and meet you, and it was like he was waiting. He was never ever too busy. But I remember coming in this day, and he said, "Oh, Dave, come and have a look at this." He was like a little kid, and which was great because I love that. You know, he was so passionate about things, and the thing he loved most was no doubt. You know, cars, and he said to me, "Come and have a look at this." And he had this little square box in his hand. He said, "Come on, come on," and he went over to a car and it went doot doot, and he said, central locking. I said, what? He goes, central locking, you know, the car. I said, you're kidding, you know. He said, yeah, you know, like, and yet we take it for granted these days, and yet here it is, you know. He was one of the, and you talk about being, yeah, you know, like, he wasn't the one who invented it, but he was one of the ones that was introducing it into these cars. It was really amazing.
Well, Peter, we might allow you to go and test your central locking on your lovely Holden Park out front. Thank you so much for your time. I'll allow you to say your goodbyes to our guests here.
Good to see you again, Dave.
Peter,
Good on you, Lewis.
nice to meet you.
Yeah. Likewise.
Cheers,
Andrew,
mate.
no worries.
Pleasure.
I'll leave you in good hands anyway.
Thank you very much. Well, it was a very special trophy and still is, Lewis. Still is. A very special trophy. Well, you just head back to those times, those early times, and the relationship between the Brock family and Holden. Where did all that begin? Because I believe your father was a Holden dealer, and in fact, let's even go even further than that. Let's talk about the Brock family and almost automobiles in general, because a great-great-uncle was a founding member of the RACV. There just seems to be an incredible automotive bond.
It's a bit of a worry, isn't it?
It is a bit of a worry. I'm a bit concerned. What was in the water out there in Hurstbridge? What was going on?
Well, that was our uncle Henry James, and he was a founder of the RACV, and he also won the first road race from Sydney to Melbourne. So it was definitely there. My dad loved motorsport. I mean, he took us all. We went to lots of hill climbs, and we just tag along, and you know, and it was just really, you know, fascinating to us. We had no money, so he'd take us in the back. We used to climb fences and to get in and watch and all sorts of things. It was just really funny. But we went to lots of motor race meetings.
But he was a Holden dealer, is that correct?
Yes. Well,
You worked for it.
no, he had a sub-agency.
Oh,
So the local Holden dealer was allowed to sublet his agency to local people. It was actually a Greensboro agency, and he had a sub-agency. Yeah, but the Holden connection was pretty
Was that
strong.
the one where one of those cars went missing one night, Lou, and so did Peter?
Are you going to tell that story?
I nearly just did, I think.
I think you should. The car goes missing middle of the night.
You have
Peter
to go
Brock,
back
we
to
want to hear that.
This is where we're in Hurstbridge.
Yeah, Sputnik. It was when the Sputnik was coming over. Dad was, I think that's EK Holdens.
So it was
Yeah.
early
EK?
60s?
So that's 62.
62, 60, yeah.
Tell the story, Phil.
Well, I was very young, so I had nothing to do with it. But yeah, no, the car, Dad had the demo car, and all of a sudden they realised the car's missing, and so's Peter.
What's the time of
And
day?
how old was Peter at that
Is this
stage?
into the night?
This is into the night. Yeah.
Oh, probably 7 o'clock or something.
Yeah,
That'd
yeah,
all be 6
that
or
way,
7 o'clock
yeah.
at night, yeah. And he was found. He was up at Panton Hill with a couple of his mates up there. So, you know, Dad particularly wasn't too happy about.
Well, actually,
Peter
he came
didn't
back.
have a licence at that stage.
Oh
by the
no,
way.
he was way too young for a licence.
Probably about 15 or 16.
Not that we condone any of that sort of
No.
These things
No.
happen.
Now, what message are we sending to the kids?
Well, he
That's
was
right.
delivering.
If you're going to do it, get away with it. Don't come.
He was delivering urgent penicillin to a mate. Okay, it was on a
I knew there
mission.
was a good reason.
But
He was doing the beer though.
anyway, he came back and thought, I've got away with this. Parked the car at the front, raced inside, jumped into the bed, pulled the covers over, and of course Mum and Dad heard him. You know what mums and dads are like, they don't miss any of this. Went out, my mum put a hand on the bonnet of the car and went in and ripped the beds off Peter, and there he is with his clothes on, right? He'd been up seeing his mate Titch Worthington up at Panton Hill, and probably doing a few donuts up on the main road up at Panton Hill.
Yeah.
Well, it's one way to put some extra Ks on the... Well, it could have become a demo car, of course. Now,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, the Brock family and the Austin name are also synonymous. Could you talk me through how an Austin is mutilated, from what I know, with an axe?
Mutilated.
Mutilated with an axe to become...
Yeah, just artistic licence.
Artistic licence?
Modified.
Well, that just shows the after effects, but before that they had this incredibly non-aerodynamic boxy body on them, which just doesn't allow any real, scope for modification. So what Peter actually did was he got my mother's axe. Okay, we had wood heating then, and the axe was actually being used regularly, and chopped the body off it, which really upset my mum because it was her axe.
It blooded the axe, yeah.
And And then there were various modifications done to it, like the springs were turned upside down to lower it. The radiator was leaned back because they came vertical because you needed it needed to stand vertically so that the air would go through and cool the engine. So Peter leant it back, which was great aerodynamics, but
It used to boil.
it used to boil. It always boiled. I mean, this thing, and if you were sitting as a passenger, you'd be having this boiling steam and water spraying all over you.
Well, I believe if you were a passenger in that particular car, that wasn't the only thing you were doing. You were often seen as the person carrying the battery.
That was Phil's job.
You were the
Yeah,
battery
Phil was
carrier.
too small to drive.
That explains a
I
lot.
was the youngest, so I got the hard one. Yeah. So you see they hold this battery with this boiling water overload. Yeah.
Well, this car has recently, this particular variation of an original car has recently been valued at near $500,000.
Yes, it has. Yeah, it's insured for that. That's correct.
How does that make
and
you
it
feel?
is the car. It doesn't have the original tyres. We had to put new tyres on it. But then I reckon that's, you know, tyres lasting nearly 60 years, 50, 60 years is a pretty good life for tyres, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you've driven it. What's it like to drive?
I drove it today, round a paddock. Look, you want a smooth road because it's got no shockers and it's quite bouncy because it's just riding on springs. But it's really nice. It doesn't have any synchros and it's got no brakes.
But does it go?
It goes.
It goes.
And it goes. It'll do 70 mile an hour, this thing. Seriously. It goes. But if you're going to go 70 mile an hour, you better have an idea of what's happening in front of you because you've got to, you know, Peter just used to stop it by throwing it into a slide. I don't have quite that confidence. I just sort of back off earlier and turn the ignition off and let it roll to a halt, you know.
Andrew, as a punter, and we won't harp on that point, but as somebody who's not directly connected with the family, when did you become aware of this particular car, or were you still just caught up with Monaros and Tiranas for a long period of time, or did you have a base knowledge of this vehicle?
Well, didn't have much of a base knowledge, I guess, Glenn. It was more, as you said, his racing cars, but I suppose there's been so much written and said about him over the years that how it all started, blah, 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 and he used to get asked that all the time, and so that's when he would have talked about that, and I was thinking, well, it's just a great, Hurstbridge, in that sort of country town area, it's great sort of background to sort of start racing, just been on dirt roads and mucking around and stuff like that, I reckon, and it just would have been the perfect environment. And you see Craig Lowndes is from that area, and probably, originally, and probably did
Played
this.
for the same footy club,
Yeah,
Craig Lowndes.
probably did the
Same
same.
team? Was he in the same team?
Yeah, same. Actually, I'll tell you something. Craig Lowndes only played reserves football, didn't get into the seniors. But I don't want to say that publicly.
Well, I think you just have. I think you just have.
Too late.
Goodness me. And because you actually, from what I know, as a young man, you had a shrine of Peter Brock.
Yeah, I did. It was
Merchandise, memorabilia,
yeah.
photography,
Yeah.
you name it. And there wasn't a picture of this little Austin in there?
No, it wasn't Austin, wasn't a Holden, I guess. Maybe that's why I didn't make it on the wall, but yeah, it was a bit of a...
What drew you to Peter Brock?
Well, originally, my father was a petrol head. He got me into that side of things, and he was a Holden man, so I had to follow Holden. So I didn't have much choice in the end, really. And back then, when I was sort of looking at it, he was the man, the Holden man. So sort of got pushed into it, but I'm pretty glad I did. So growing up, and he was very successful. So
Did you ever meet him?
Yeah, several times. Yeah.
And what was that like? We heard Peter Dacos earlier talking as a 22-year-old.
Well, I probably met him first when I was 6 or 7. So getting a shirt signed or something like that, and as he would have done millions of times. And then got in a couple of situations where I actually got to meet him when doing a bit of work on a radio show a few years ago, and he came in as a guest and basically ended up co-hosting for the whole hour, and you couldn't shut him up. It's just unbelievable.
Doesn't sound like a
No.
Well, I've got a quote here to share. I remember I went to Bathurst in 1997. I think it was when he first sort of retired, and on the Thursday, which is well before the racing really gets serious, and there was a queue of 100 yards of people all waiting to get something signed, and he would speak to everyone individually. Do you know of that eloquent gentleman, Phil? That was you.
It was me.
That was you.
You said what you said for the first time. But yeah, I went there on the Thursday in particular. I wanted to see him about a particular thing. I'd been living in Queensland for quite a while. Just anyway, needed to see him. I thought, I'll go Thursday, there won't be many people around. went down to where the transport was and said, oh no, he's down in the dummy grid area. And you go down there and he's just, as a queue of people. On Thursdays there's not many people at all. So, but yeah, everyone had their 5 minutes with Peter Brock. It was quite amazing.
Is that how you remember it, Andrew?
Yeah, it was a pain being in the queue. But then once you got to the front and got things signed or whatever and had a bit of a yak, and you realised, yeah, it was worth it. But
have you still got that first signed item? Will you have it somewhere?
Yeah, it's still somewhere at home. I've moved a couple of times, but it'll be in a box or something like that somewhere. But yeah, so, I think it was a Last of the Big Bangers shirt. I think the 84 VK. Yeah. And
singlet or a t-shirt?
It was a shirt.
Okay.
Yeah.
We sold out that year.
Sold out.
That was our first merchandising year that year.
Yeah.
Where we got into it. We decided.
It's amazing now, and like that's just another business in itself.
It was. Well, what happened was that prior to that, the sponsors always produced a range of things like caps and jackets, and they generally gave them away, and the team wore them. And '83 Christmas, I had Christmas at Peter's place, and we had this brainstorming session, and we said, we can make money out of this, you know, we can really do it. I already had a business, so I kind of had to sell my business to go and work for Peter to do this. And I started in July, and that was our first major meeting. And I had this van, you know, like a combi van sort of thing, full of jackets and caps and t-shirts and singlets and everything. And I ripped up to Bathurst, and we completely sold out. I made a lot of money and thought, wow. Well,
what have we found here?
Yeah.
You should have kept that one secret, I reckon.
It was very hard. Well, people watched us. They'd be walking up and down. That was the strangest Bathurst, because on the Saturday morning, I don't know if you remember, but it snowed.
Yeah.
It snowed on Saturday morning, and I sold every rally jacket out. Yeah. And then Saturday afternoon, something got really hot, and they had all these navy blue singlets, and we went up on the mountain, where all the really, you know, hardcore fans are, and sold out of singlets in the same day. Yeah, it was great.
So what was the need to make money back in those days? Was it to fund further experiences around the track, or was it for your own pocket? Or
yeah, well, people don't make money out of motor racing per se, really, do they? They just don't. Really. So it was a means of supplementing, you know, the funds going into the race team and to hopefully make a profit. I mean, it's like anybody. You want to come away with some financial reward as well.
So could you just explain that for me though, Lewis? When I look at a car, it's laid out with the sponsors. When I look at a race suit, it's laid out with sponsors. How can you not make money racing a motor vehicle?
It's very expensive.
It's a different era though. I mean, the biggest change that's happened in Australian motor racing has been the V8 supercars. And they've done an absolutely brilliant job to get a lot larger percentage of the population coming to their sport. Through that, they've got a host of different manufacturers who were supporting it. But back in those days, you know, up till the mid-80s, you only really had motor car associated companies, whether it be oil companies or car companies, but they were only really the ones associated with it. So the amount of dollars that was there wasn't really a lot. So, and the cars were very expensive for what you were doing. So yeah, it wasn't a great money-making proposition at all, was it?
There were cigarette companies. Yeah. The jacket there. I mean, and that was 1984 was the last year when Marlboro was Peter's sponsor. Then they went to Mobil, and Phil's right. They were all motoring. They were corporations associated somehow with the motoring industry.
I just wonder though, what sort of money would Peter Brock have been making in his heyday from motorsport?
Really, that's a hard, not much.
From motorsport, but the money's in endorsements.
Was he making what he was worth, or was he missing out on his?
Sorry, but in that, there's virtually no prize money. I mean, Bathurst, for example, was the only race of the year where, and you probably went back then, there was probably maybe $20,000 to win.
And that wouldn't cover the expenses of the weekend.
It would cost you $200,000 to do it. You know, like with the cars, people, transporters, all that sort of stuff. So, prize money was totally irrelevant.
And that was divided amongst the team too. The prize money was didn't go to the driver. He would distribute it amongst the team evenly, everyone there. The real money that Peter made was actually through endorsements, because he was very popular, and when You know, like Holden would pay him an endorsement fee as well as assisting with engineering work on cars. But the sponsors that are on the car itself are, you know, that would go to the car to set it up, but not for his wage.
Well, his greatest endorsement may have been the 05 campaign, the
Yep.
blood alcohol content campaign. Can you talk me through its inception, how it came to be, and how Peter Brock found himself sporting 05 on virtually every single thing that he drove or twirled or stood next to?
In 1975, he first started doing road safety, which was the beginning of the 05. He didn't actually drive 05 in 75, but I have a copy of his diary here. And
Just here.
in his diary, he lists he lists basically the components of the road safety training program. And the 75 diary is really interesting because part of what he was doing was going to high schools and educational institutions. So when you look at that year, he won Bathurst in that year in a private car, and it was actually built pretty near here at Gowan Hindhoff. And he also did with Tim Pemberton, who was the first year as his PR person, he did the road safety campaign. And what he was doing was teaching road safety to high school kids and to colleges throughout Victoria. So that was the first.
And that was his own intention, or he'd been instructed to do that?
No, he was approached and he was paid to do it, but it was quite a commitment because
Absolutely.
you read like he wins Bathurst on Sunday. Monday he's off in Druin doing a road safety course. That's what it's like, and they travelled Victoria and worked very hard at it. But they were paid by the Victorian state government to do that. So it was a contractual agreement like, you know, Mobil or Bridgestone.
We actually had a conversation about the 05 number travelling around in the Targa car. You know, obviously when you're 5 days with somebody in a car, you get to talk about a whole range of really cool things.
And you did that on how many occasions? Three to 5 times?
Four times.
4 times.
Yeah.
Number right in the middle there.
Yeah. So, you know, and he actually spoke about the 05 number as his ownership, but also, you know, obviously gave some passion to the background behind that. You know, I think he was really quite, still quite engaged in the concept. You know, it's been really important. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Because his car, from what I understand of motor racing, when you're the best, you can wear number 1. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He had every right to wear number 1 on his car,
Yeah.
but he chose to wear 05.
Yeah. Yeah. Once he took that on board, it became a career choice, you know, virtually. And I'm sure it did a great amount to actually publicise the 05 campaign. Certainly there was a major drama happening with road deaths. From memory, there was over 1,000 around that period,
1,034.
Yeah, there was a number that people said this is just unacceptable. I mean, I think now it's back to 300 or something. That's a major result from a campaign. Plus our population has grown, you know, probably 3 times the population.
We might come back to the diary in a little while, but you made me think about road deaths and reasons for, and I'd imagine that a lot of people in this day and age are on their mobile phones, Phil, when they're driving a car. Now this, I believe, was Peter's mobile phone. You might like to just open that up for us, and along with your brother and our other guests here, have a look inside and tell me exactly what you make of the technology of the day.
The old Motorola, eh?
So you might even like to spin it around for us so we can get a good look at that. So this is a mobile phone in a suitcase.
Called it the bat phone. This was the bat phone.
This is a very interesting contraption. How did this come to be?
Mid-80s, 85, 86.
Now there's an aerial there too somewhere, Phil, if you want to get some reception.
Yeah. Aerial?
Pop that up.
Put the aerial up, you'll never get a reception.
Of course, this would be the way to do business in your car, travelling to and
Look,
from
the
the
battery's
office.
almost as big as a car battery.
Well, that is incredibly heavy. How did this come to be into the possession of the Brock family, and could in fact Peter use this contraption? Do you know how to make it work?
It's a phone. You press the button,
Well,
you dial a number and press
I
talk.
believe when it came to technology, I believe... No, let's
I
leave
was actually having to teach
sporting
him how to
codes out of this.
SMS, you know, about 2 years ago.
There you go.
Oh yeah, well that's a skill, a difficult one. No, Peter was like what Peter Dacos was saying before about remote central locking, remote, you know. Peter was into this. He loved fax machines because then he could just send things without having to, you know, go through all the aggravation, and this was a part of it.
The fax machine have any particular ritual to it? Did he...
Yeah, well, he called it not a fax machine, but a wrapper fax.
Why?
I don't know.
A wrapper fax?
He must have seen some brand somewhere on the planet that with wrapper fax.
A wrapper fax.
Called it a wrapper fax, but yeah, suddenly we could do business by fax, and you could get the deal done in half an hour. And this was Peter, right? Because Peter wasn't he? Peter was always like, do it now, get it finished, move on to the next thing, and you know, have you done that yet?
How would you have gone? How would you have gone using that, Phil, in one of your races across town against your brother? Because I believe you.
The races against Pete. No.
You were spotted racing across this great town of ours, and probably some other locations throughout our great country, against your brother in an assortment of vehicles.
And I don't think I ever won one of them.
You never beat him? Did you ever beat him?
Once.
Once.
In a go-kart race. Yeah.
Walk me through it.
It's true. I remember it very well because it was the only time that I actually beat him in a race.
How old were you?
Oh, that I was probably then about 23, 24.
And was there a reason you won? Was it just
sheer
skill?
a hell of a lot better go-kart than he had. Yeah. That's true. I kid you not.
Because you did used to race across town, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, you do. Okay, we might as well talk about it. It was Peter, if I say what car he had, people know the era, but it's okay. He used to have a Gemini.
There's no statute of limitations, is there?
Exactly. You're free to talk.
He had a Holton Gemini and I had a Mitsubishi Galant, which are both 1600cc, so they were pretty similar. So we had fairly equal cars in those days. So it used to be a situation where you wouldn't necessarily plan it, but you happened to be going somewhere.
Like
and I had a similarity, Peter, where you hated being behind someone. So you get to there, so that one gets to there.
How did you cope?
And just away you go. And it didn't take long before it was on. And it wasn't total maniacal stuff, but it was pretty quick.
You were going hell for leather, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I like that. Well, what about when the two of you paired and actually raced cars together? What was that like?
Fantastic. The hardest thing would be for the other guys that drove with Peter. I was probably very fortunate because it was a bit of a chance to do something. You know, to run at Bathurst in a possible winning car and with the best driver that was out there. So to be able to do it, I was just absolutely wrapped. And I guess being his little brother and always, not subservient's the wrong word, but to sort of used to being in the background of it with Pete, it was pretty easy just to go there and just do my job. Most other people who went from there on in had troubles with it because Peter just gets all the attention. You know, the press are always there the whole time, and the co-driver can sit there and do whatever he likes. Doesn't affect anything. All he's got to do is get in the car and drive. But I just absolutely enjoyed the fact of I guess it was like pitting myself against him without trying to beat him, but in exactly the same car, being able to run it, same track, same day type thing, and just seeing how you went. I guess, and that to me was the most important thing because I knew how good he was. I wanted to see where I stood in the scheme of things. So, you know, I absolutely really enjoyed it.
We'll jump down to Andrew and we'll just go along the line, and I'll ask you, Andrew, the question, how did you see Peter Brock, the driver?
I dare say probably the most naturally gifted driver that I've seen from this country anyway. They'll just, when you watch him drive, one arm on the window, just sort of casually flicking on lock with the left hand every now and then. And he just looked like he was at one with the car when he drove. And you see other guys on race cam and they're all fidgety and just really worked up. And with him, it just looked like he was Sunday drive, pretty casual. And I think was it 87 with the VL on slicks, and he's got the arm on the window for the whole time, and just going, oh, what's going on there?
And you've partnered him in the car itself at Targa and some other events. How did you see Peter Brock, the driver?
That's spot on the money, you know, absolutely. The whole thing for me was like getting in the car and looking over and going, oh my God, it's race cam and I'm there. I'm like, how cool is this? And it was like that, like driving through the town stages on Targa. he has literally got the arm out the window, and he is like doing this. It's like, how on earth can you do that? And there was never a moment in the car with Peter where you go, oh dear, or you know, oh my God, because the whole time he's just like completely at one with the car.
And was
So
he
cool.
listening to your pace notes, or was he doing it on his own?
Which kind of surprised me, because as a driver, like as a race driver, you often hear the experiences about race drivers driving race cars and not being able to do the rally thing, which is hearing the pace notes and translating them to the road. But we did, I don't know, 3 hours of sort of practice calling pace notes to each other, and first stage he just kind of got it. And it was really cool, you know, it's really cool to be part of that. Yeah.
Lewis, how did you see your brother, the racing car driver?
Peter, I just want to say about that,
Please.
because Peter spoke about with Anne, and that their cooperation, and that you can imagine driving along, Anne's calling numbers and things.
Of course.
And I think that he loved driving with you.
Was a hoot.
You know, he really, really had a good time.
Because you're a sucker, Lewis.
No, I just...
He knows where his bread's buttered, doesn't he?
So you could have actually said that.
Very
You just put it
smooth.
first.
could have. You were going to say that.
God.
Peter donated a painting to a local preschool through the Peter Brock Foundation as a fundraiser. When he, before the painting was auctioned, he was asked to speak about the painting. And he said, my approach to driving is very much like my approach to painting, art. The car is the paintbrush and the road is the canvas, and he just gets into a zone where he just flows through. And I saw him that way, just very clean. You didn't see him hang the tail out and that sort of thing, but suddenly he'd be getting a gap on someone. And that's just clean driving, and you know, if you break traction, you're losing time, that sort of thing. So.
And first hand, Phil?
Very interesting, because most what you consider great drivers, 90% of the time are the same as the other good drivers, let's say, but they'll always pull something out of the hat, and that's what Peter was always able to do, was just do that little bit extra to get and gain that bit of a gap and do that time and time again. The other thing that I think absolutely is amazing, he started racing in about 1967 or 68, and what are we talking, 40 years later, had exactly the same passion behind the wheels he had then.
Why? Why did he hold on to that passion?
Oh, who knows? But it's...
Did you hold on to that passion?
I think I have, but I've done a tenth of the driving that Peter has. So therefore, I've still got... I know I can still improve as a driver and still want to do that, right?
Do you understand why I ask that, though? Because there are people in business, people in sports, people throughout life who say, I've had enough today.
Yeah.
I've just had enough.
Did. He never did. I mean...
So his retirement in 97 wasn't
no,
really a retirement,
look,
was it?
That was... He didn't want to retire personally. He was put in a position where he felt that he should retire. But I think very obviously when you look at the last 18 months to 2 years of his life, when he was out there doing nearly as much motor racing as he was back in 96, 97, but in different forms, whether it be Targa or you know, the old early model Holden Goodwood, he was and the Group C cars he was running, he was absolutely as passionate in driving as he was before. And for a guy of that, not at that age, but have done it for that long, to still have that single-mindedness when he got in the car. Early last year, no, it's not last year now, is it? Yes, sorry, early last year, we're at Phillip Island. He was running a Group C trainer down there. And I was running in the same race, but I was a few spots behind again. Anyway, but there was the Group A car running, which is
We
in
can
the
arrange a
Skyline.
counsellor for you. You'll be right.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I need one. And the Skyline's a faster car. But, you know, I had a yak to Pete after the first race. And I said, oh, you know, car's pretty quick. He said, yeah, I'm going to get him. I said, well, you know, it's a Group A. He said, look, he blows off down the straight. He said, but I'm going to get him. Oh, okay, fine. And he did. He beat the guy because it was just like it was his competitive spirit. He was going to beat this guy. And, you know, you think that after all he's done in his life, he'd be going, "Ah, it's okay. Why worry?" But no, he had to do it.
Was he obsessed with winning, do you think?
Sounds fair to me, yeah.
Yeah, that was the point of doing it, for sure. So if that's an obsession, I guess so. But he was a pretty gracious
It wasn't just
loser.
winning. It was improving himself, not just beating everyone else, but it was getting better himself. You know, I think that was a lot of it.
Yeah,
too, wasn't it?
that's a good way of putting it.
But you just brought up Lou. There was a race meeting I saw at Winton. He was leading the race, and this would be about 1983, 84, and it was raining. He got a fair bit of a gap on the second place. Last lap, he spun. Other guy got through and won the race. So, and then Peter got back on track, ran second, what have you, and of course the journos were up there on TV, and immediately thinking Peter's going to probably spit the dummy here. When I said, "Well, Brocky, what did you think about that?" And he said, "Wasn't that the best race you've seen?" And yeah. George, how he beat me there, that was just fantastic, but that was just the best race. And that was Peter's ability, I think, that the public absolutely adored, was he turned everything into a positive the whole time. He was never out there bagging anyone, never negative about stuff. He was just always looking at the positive side of things. And I remember I was there at the time thinking, I mean, we were mad, you know, that he hadn't won. And just his ability to do that, it was just absolutely fantastic, yeah.
And we've got so many other great props, stories to tell, but I know that you're probably feeling a little bit peckish. The night is pushing on. So why don't we break and go and have something to eat, something to drink, and we'll come back in a little while and continue our conversation. Well, we've had our share of unusual props, but I think none more so than these two items. And Lewis, I'm going to present these to you. We've got the Jason Winters tea and the thermos type mug. Now, for goodness sake, put me out of my misery and explain to me how those two items play a part in PB's life.
Jason Winters tea was totally Peter's favourite. He drank it all the time, and he'd say, "Here, try this, have a go."
Was he a pusher?
Was
he actually
yes,
a pusher?
Yes, he was at that tea, absolutely. And it was okay, but it was a bit like black tea or Chinese tea sort of. But it is reputed to have remarkable therapeutic qualities, so we should try it before we judge.
Well, maybe we should. And the thermos, I believe that was almost permanently attached to his hand.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And did you have this in the car?
We had to find a spot for that somewhere in the car.
In the car?
I usually ended up in my little rally bag here.
And you had the Jason Winters tea?
Oh, it was in some nondescript in little plastic baggy thing.
Baggies.
So I went. Yeah.
Now I just wonder if Andrew, are you going to go out and buy some of this tea now?
No, I'm not a big tea drinker, so not even
the legendary Peter Brock's endorsement could force you to go to the supermarket and buy something. You probably can't buy that at the supermarket. It has to be flown in from some exotic country.
I knew nothing about it, so but no, I don't drink tea. But
well, speaking of exotic countries and exotic guests, Mr. Andrew Gaze, when Peter Brock was an ambassador or an athlete liaison at the Olympics, I believe he ran out of tea. He ran out of tea and he was distraught.
Yeah, I think that was more the case in 2004. He was the athlete liaison officer also in 2000 during the Sydney Olympics, and part of his role there was specifically to look after the basketball team. So we got to know Peter quite well during that experience, and I go back a little bit further with Peter because I did a TV commercial with him, a mobile ad. I forget what we were flogging. We were flogging some mobile.
And you do it well.
And well, collectively we did it even better. And I remember during the shoot there that Colleen Adamson, who was his manager, who was also my manager for Advantage International, she was there, and she was almost religiously set by the clock to know he could only go about 45 minutes to an hour before he needed to have his little cup of tea. So he was pretty keen on the product. I didn't know that there was such a passion for a specific brand.
Oh, there's a passion, all right.
But he definitely had a desire to get his fix of tea every now and again.
How did he go about working with the basketball team and the other athletes at the Olympic Games? Because I can only imagine that it would have been a great privilege on both sides of the fence, so to speak, to work together. Yeah,
Peter was this guy that's such an icon of Australian sport, and for me, I was lucky because I'd known Peter for quite a number of years, but you know, when we introduced him, and I specifically introduced him to the Australian team, you could see the fellas around the room. There was this icon of Australian sport, and you know, it's like, well, how do you behave in front of the Messiah, so to speak? So it was interesting to see the reaction, but within, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, Peter was on our level. You know, it was no longer, well, here's this sort of incredible figure that's out there, and you know, do we have to watch what we say and this type of thing. He was immediately one of the fellas and cracking jokes and being part of the group, and I think that was just epitomised his personality and how relaxed he made others feel, whether it's the Australian men's basketball team or the average punter in the street. He treated everyone as equals and loved to just have a bit of a yak and a bit of a yarn, and he was the king of getting out of situations where, you know, there's sometimes these rabid fans out there. He was the king of being able to politely do the right thing and move on, so to speak. So, but it was funny also with the Australian team because Luke Longley, he had got this massive figure, 7'2", playing with the Chicago Bulls, internationally renowned type player, and he was probably one of the biggest Peter Brock fans going around. And
really?
It was unbelievable to see the big fella Luke, who just this, like I said, this internationally renowned sports person, be in awe of the Australian icon of racing.
I'd actually love to have seen Luke Longley maybe behind the wheel of the Austin. Now that would be a sight for all to take
Peter
in.
took him round, because I remember Peter took me around Sandown, and just before I got in the car, Steve Fraser, who was our manager, he came over.
You had an awful lot of managers.
No, well, it's a one organisation, but different people.
Very hard to organise.
Yeah.
No, they were actually. Peter demanded he needed all these people around him to look after him, organise him. Yeah. But Steve Fraser was there, and just before I got in the car, he says, Andrew, just don't panic, but he likes to show off a little bit when he gets people in the car. And we went around Sandown, and I thought, fair dinkum, this bloke is completely lost his mind, you know, because it was just the most horrific experience of my life. I got out of the car and said to myself, this guy absolutely should be committed, because that's just not right. And I remember I got in the car and it was absolutely pooed my pants going down the pits. And we went down the pits and I'm thinking, surely not any further, you know. This. And then we got on the track and we're going around and we're up and down and we're smashing. And after the first straight, we're going straight for this wall. And I'm thinking, this is impossible for this car not to go straight in this wall. So eventually it gets it around, and the rest of the way I was praying to the good Lord above. I was, please only be one lap. Please only be one lap. And then eventually come round, and sure enough, we didn't go into the pits and had to do the whole thing again. So we were right round there, and for me it was, I mean, for the next week I was on this, like I just had the life flash beside me, and I swore I'd never ever do it again, and I never did. But Luke Longley, who's this big 7'2", laconic, you know, really, he's never going to die of high blood pressure because nothing's stressing him out.
Definitely not Luke.
He sort of went through, got out and said, oh yeah, pretty good. No worries. So it was, maybe he went a little bit slower with the big fella in there.
Well, he must be a rare bird, because I've seen a photo of Lee Matthews after he's just got out of the car with Peter Brock, and he looks, as you just described, of your own feelings with Peter Brock in the car.
Stupid.
Anne's mentioned that he liked to push it to the limit and beyond. So that's probably a fair summation of the man and how he used to drive a car. But how did he convey his advice to a team? Was there a one-on-one situation or a team situation? You mentioned he was working directly with the basketball team where he passed on something that you went, right, that's great.
Well, I think it was one of those things that it took a little while for him to have an impact on the group. He's very, very philosophical, and, you know, for some of us simple basketball players, it might have taken us, what's he really talking about there, you know? Because he was able to pull in all these analogies, very entertaining, but I think the crux of his messages did take a little while because of his sometimes abstract way that he would present them. And we go, you know, it was almost like we're listening to the nutty professor up here. What's he really on about?
So what did you take away? Is there something you could honestly say, right, I remember that and it works for me?
Well, I think that the thing that in a very general sense was the idea of saying, yes, we're going out there to do our absolute very best, and yes, we really want to strive to achieve the absolute highest that we could do in the Olympic arena. But at the same time, I think that the underlying theme to what he was saying is to just to make sure you enjoy the experience. You know, it's inevitable. You have successes and failures throughout the journey, but the journey in itself is the most important thing, and making sure you enjoy that ride. And you know, don't get too caught up in the absolute highs, and don't get too down when you're down. Trying to maintain that even keel, I think, was the biggest message he tried to get through to us.
I want you to ask Andrew if he's going to do Targa next year, 5 days of that.
You can ask him.
Kind of nice.
You ask him.
5 days.
No, well, that's to me is a bit hard to comprehend, really. One is I'm not real big on speed, and two, I'm not keen on sitting in a car when you're 6'7". Yeah,
he does barrack for Hawthorn, I believe.
Hey.
Not
to say anything. What sort of car do you drive, by the way?
I actually do drive a Holden right now, and I have to say though, I don't have any great allegiances to any particular manufacturer or anything like that. But no, certainly as a youngster growing up, really as a fan, I guess, or a backseat fan of motor racing in general. The only real thing you'd ever watch really back then, when I was a youngster, was Bathurst, and just. You know, Peter Brock was synonymous with Bathurst, so I think you know, anyone that even utters the word Bathurst doesn't have Peter Brock in that same sentence.
Lewis, Andrew mentioned the fact that Peter would instill in the team, the basketball team in this instance, the enjoyment factor. You must go out and enjoy it. From your recollection, your knowledge, did Peter enjoy being a part of those Olympic Games?
Oh yeah, it was an honour. You know, he considered it an honour to be invited to do that, and he would have given anything he could, you know, if he could help one person. I mean, he would have been always available.
Oh yeah, and you could sense every time he was with it. Wasn't just about you know, him considering himself with this profound advice that was going to be the panacea to everyone's stresses that were going through the Olympics. It was really a two-way thing, and you could see that he was in there trying to absorb all that was going on, I'm sure for his own benefit as well. But he was by far the greatest Australian fan we had at the Olympics. I mean...
Well, I don't know about that, because I'm pretty sure there's actual footage of one P. Brock asleep in the middle of a swimming contest or the actual carnival itself, and Roy and HG picked up on that. They caught him at the swimming asleep in the crowd.
The only reason he would have been sleeping is because he was going 23 hours in a 24-hour day, and somewhere along the line he had to find.
He might have been without his tea, I'm not sure.
And maybe he didn't have his tea and needed a little hit. But amongst the village, he was around from room to room. It was almost like you had the Energizer Bunny there. Here he's this, not elderly, but older sort of guy that was around there, and he was bouncing around everywhere, and it was like, hey, what's he on? I mean, surely the tea doesn't do this to you. But he was just
become an infomercial for the tea, hasn't it? So
he was so enthusiastic and had this passion. It was infectious. You know, it was infectious amongst everyone. If you were going to pick the stereotype of someone who was ideal for that sort of athlete liaison type role, he had it all. You know, he was this larger-than-life figure that made people feel very comfortable around them, and just presented this amazing energy that was like, gee, if this bloke's up and at him and he's not even competing, it sort of got you up and at him, and you're like, yeah, this is great, it's fantastic.
So he carried the baton, Lewis. He was a part of the Olympic Games, and he loved it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've got his, you know, outfits and so on at the foundation now, and those things I know are things that he really treasured. He kept everything he was given. He brought home all this gear, some of which is in a fashion sense a bit ordinary.
Dodgy.
Well, have a look at some of these other, I mean, you speak about fashion and Peter Brock. I mean, these are the sorts of things that he was getting around wearing. I mean, this is an incredible piece of material. I think that's worthy of any nightclub, I'd say. I'd say that's a wonderful thing to get out and about in.
I think Mobile will be proud that you said that.
Oh, absolutely. Look, that's an endorsement, no doubt, for our program, but in my mind, there's no real surprise.
No,
that Peter Brock was this way with the Olympic athletes.
Was there a difference between the 2000 and 2004 Olympics as far as Peter's approach, or?
Well, I never
he slept more
as close to it in 2004 because I was part of the commentary team, and so I never got that same interaction with Peter, other than I was trying to do many of the things that he was trying to do. So if I'd go into the village, you know, if ever I thought of, well, what can you provide to these athletes that are going through this fairly stressful situation where they're competing and representing their country and all those types of things, and certainly I took away from it my recollections of how Peter behaved and how he tried to contribute as the ideal way of what you want to do when you're amongst the other team members. So, but the thing about Peter is he probably signed more autographs than Ian Thorpe when he's around there, because all the Australian team was like, hey, it's Peter Brock, we'll go get his autograph, sort of thing. So he very, very popular.
It would almost be remiss of me not to ask, did he have an effect on any of the other teams there, outside of the Australian team? Were there any other countries, individuals interested in Peter Brock? Did they know of Peter Brock?
I don't think a lot of them. I mean, the New Zealanders obviously did, and you know, perhaps some others, but the combination of Peter Brock and Laurie Lawrence, I mean, they brought enough attention to themselves that you could see some of these other countries, whereas the Asians, the Africans, looking around, and I mean, they had no idea what they're doing, but they're like, look at these buffoons running around. You know, what are they on? It was just one of those things, and it made sense to us as Australians because they're very reflective of the Australian sense of humour and very popular figures in their own right. So it made a lot of sense to us. But that's what we'd often sit back and think. Imagine what the Americans are looking at these two going, what are they doing? What's their job? What are they competing in? Because they're certainly enjoying their time here, that's for sure.
Any final thoughts, Lewis, about Peter Brock and the Olympics?
Well, if you went right back to the first trophy we started with, he would have dreamt about the Olympics at that age, 11-year-old. I just think he had such a passion to compete and to excel. I guess that theme carries all the way through his career. And then wanting to pass that on too, because he in the Peter Brock Foundation, we conducted a bicycle ride, which was all ages, all groups, you know, from fast riders to little kids. When the ride took place, he completed the ride at the back of the field with the little kids, the little 3-year-olds with the little legs spinning and the streamers off their handlebars to get them home. And I think he just saw that role more and more strongly. So
Did
that was
he
like
still
2 years
beat
ago.
Phil on that day?
Hey?
Did he still beat Phil home on that day?
Yes.
He still beat Phil. That's unfortunate.
Easily.
Very good. Andrew, thanks so much for your time. We've really enjoyed having you
No
here.
worries.
I'll allow you to say goodbyes to the group and
No worries.
get back to shooting some hoops
Good
in the
on ya.
backyard.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Good on you. Great stuff.
Lovely to meet you.
Look forward to seeing the
Cheers.
final product.
Yeah. Cheers.
Be good. Thank you.
We'll try and edit you out where we can.
I'm sure you will. No worries.
We'll let you disappear.
I'll see you guys. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Take care.
Just as we allow one artist of a particular sport in basketball to leave, just ask you maybe to pass those along. I might actually start. No, I'll start with Andrew over here. He passed those along because Peter Brock was more than just a tarmac artist. He liked to dabble in fine arts himself. Lewis, maybe you could share some thoughts and fill some thoughts around Peter the artist extraordinaire.
This is an ink pen drawing of Alan Moffat and Peter Brock. Now, the reason this was done is we were holding a charity event, which is a car show called Brocky's Big Day Out, and Alan was Peter's special guest. So we decided to do a T-shirt with their faces on it, but with a special twist that Peter would do the art himself. So that's his work. I mean, he's actually, his work is very valuable in art auctions, and he's very good at it. And one special thing he always did was, if it was your birthday and you got a card from him, it was hand painted. You know, with a
I didn't get one.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Well, we really do need to look
But it
at
was
that
hand
counselling,
delivered
don't
here
we?
in Darwin. Darwin, he wasn't going to walk to Darwin. But
Would you have thought that, Andrew? Would you have thought that Peter Brock, this amazing car racing fiend, would be able to put pen to paper,
I guess not.
brush
I mean,
the canvas?
he's not your stereotypical sort of, like when you look at the Australian way of life and it's just, you know, blokey, drinks beers and stuff like that, but he didn't drink for about since about, what, 20 years ago, a bit more.
He'd
And,
have a wine.
and yeah, so, and then he's an artist as well, which doesn't sort of fit in with the motor racing driver. So he's, you know,
That was
more
his
than
feminine side, I think.
Yeah.
And did you detect the feminine side in Peter Brock?
Come on, Anne, you can say it. It's
Answer it
okay.
any way you like.
I'm thinking there was a lot more of the other side of it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, as a chick travelling around in a car with a guy for, 5 days or 8 days or 10 days or whatever the appropriate amount of time was. You know, you're racing, there's a lot of testosterone. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a lot of that cool non-testosterone based stuff, but, it was...
So, Anne makes a good point. When did he find time to let the big male image of this superstar drop off and put pen to paper?
Well, if Collingwood wasn't playing football on TV, he relaxed by either making furniture, and he made very rustic furniture, really interesting, unique stuff out of driftwood and things, and it was really treasured by the people that now have them, or he did art. I mean, that's how he relaxed. He didn't lie around and do nothing. He just, which is what I would probably do, is just lie around and do nothing and, yeah.
Switch off.
He was always on the go, and that's how he relaxed.
And our conversations in the car were often about business and art or Indigenous issues that popped up quite a lot.
You've nailed it there. Well, just stop on that for a moment, Anne. What would he be talking about in terms of Indigenous culture?
Oh, usually just his experiences. He'd be telling me stories about his experiences, with the Indigenous people that he'd met throughout Australia. I expected when I got in the car with him to have lots of stories about Bathurst and lots of stories about driving experiences, but the stories are very much more about his family and the business and other things in his life other than motor racing, which was, I suppose, surprising. When not surprising when you get to know him, but surprising when you first meet him.
You wouldn't be terribly surprised by that?
And at Bathurst last year, which is obviously just after his passing, I was up there for about 5 or 6 days, and just the amount of people I met was quite amazing anyway. But not one conversation was about Peter Brock the driver. Everyone was about Peter Brock the man. Yeah, which is interesting. Yeah.
Well, I think that's why people will enjoy hearing some of your insights via this production, because my own experience of Peter Brock was at Tullamarine Airport the first time I met Peter Brock, and I was waiting as part of the Carlton Football Club, which I enjoy saying with a rather strong tone because it was back in the glory days where you couldn't touch us, and waiting to get on a plane, and Peter Brock wandered over. And I am a car buff, I do love motorsport, and I certainly knew who Peter Brock was. And he said, I'd like to introduce myself, and I fell over myself. Peter Brock's introducing himself to me. Who on earth am I to have myself introduced by Peter Brock to Peter Brock? And I said, well, Glenn Manson. And he said, look, I know who you are. And I thought, fantastic. He's obviously seen me kick a goal, and of course they were great memories. And he said, I don't care about...
All two of them?
Yeah, all three. Oh no, actually three. I don't care about anything you've done on the football field. I'm really interested in what you've done in the community. And that blew me away, because when you are philanthropic at heart and you are community minded, to be rewarded by somebody who you know is on another level in terms of their commitment to the community is fantastic. So I'm not at all surprised he had those conversations with you in that car over the course of those journeys, or those cars over the course of those journeys. But I am interested, Lewis, in his passion for Indigenous culture, and in particular for the arts. I just wonder if you could just maybe bring me up to speed as to how that came about.
I think his passion for the arts is probably what drew him to it, because Maya Gallery in Templestowe is relatively close to where we live, and his interest in the arts would have taken him there, did take him there, and he met the Colin McKinnon who runs that gallery, and through that gallery services many rural communities throughout Australia and is an outlet for their art. Now, that's virtually the only source of income to go back into those communities, and Peter started to see the plight of those people, because there wasn't really, they generally did not have enough training to compete with positions for, you know, European people. So that was a lot, especially the remote, there was no jobs at all for the remote communities, so art was very important. I mean, it's in many communities the only source of income. So he supported that gallery and supported projects involving the communities that gallery was servicing as well. And from there, the other thing he did was when he did his Round Australia rallies, he met Indigenous communities, and he always was as happy to speak to the members of the Indigenous community as the guy that ran the petrol station, and they love him for it. You know, that's just...
And that was certainly something that happened with us, you know, because I grew up in Tasmania, you know, and there's...
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes,
Okay. Sure.
Come on, bring it on, bring it on. You didn't really get sort of any experience of the Indigenous culture at all in in Tasmania, you know, that you do, I guess, a little more so here. And so for me to be travelling into an area where there is an Indigenous culture, and Peter just kind of, you know, grabbed me by the hand and said, here you go, meet these people, and kind of, you know, led the way, and it was really nice, because it's not an experience that I've had really before.
Yeah.
So for me that was kind of, and it is a memorable experience from doing the safari. Yeah, so it's kind of nice.
Well, he became quite the travelling man. He competed in races beyond our shores. Yeah. Spa, Le Mans, these sorts of things. Maybe some thoughts around these sorts of OS races?
I mean, the funny thing about the Spa one was an issue in 1976 in the BMW. And Pete, through his sponsorship and what have you, organised, they bought the car from South Africa. It was a Works BMW car, got it back to Australia. And through a bit of checking of the car and specs from BMW, they found that they blow head gaskets after 8 hours. And you're going, still a 24-hour race, how's that possible? They go, well, pull the head off, change the gasket and go, and so you don't win the race, you know. So we thought, this is pretty crazy. So there's a few Australian people, engineers and what have you, who Pete contacted, and they devised a way to actually seal the head to the engine in a better way. But this is all, of course, very late on in the day. You know, they got that whole thing organised and got over, and it did, I think it was 22 hours. And it was the only BMW that had gone that far. And that, of course, included the current full German BMW Works cars. And they were all quite amazed, going, hang on, why is this car still going? It's a year-old car anyway in their specs. Yeah, so, but he, you know, obviously pushed very hard to try and get that happening. He enjoyed his overseas stuff, but he really is quite happy in Australia. I mean, you know, the ability he had in those days, he could have gone overseas and probably made a name for himself and a career over there, but he was quite happy here.
Was there a time where he was rated the #1 touring car driver in the world?
The rating which occurred quite recently, when he was in Goodwood, just prior to his passing, a magazine came out which rated him #2. And
behind who?
#2, Steve Soper.
Yeah.
Steve Soper. Now, in that were, well, every touring car driver you can think of, but this is a UK magazine. And I think a lot of, in that same year, just earlier on in that year, he was given the honour of driving Jerry Marshall's car in a parade lap. He had just passed away and he was considered to be the greatest British touring car driver up to that time. And the reason for, and now mind you, this is in English, a UK motoring fraternity acknowledging Peter in that way and also letting him drive the car when they've got all their General Motors cars there to drive. And I think the reason was that when he raced at Spa with Jerry Marshall in a Vauxhall, and I'm a bit vague on the year here, but they was a
27
I'm so glad you're
probably. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, they came second outright in a 24-hour race at Spa in '77. And for the British, I mean, a Vauxhall, firstly, imagine how they felt, because Vauxhalls have always been a bit of a standard joke, to be honest, as racing cars, and they got it up to second place in the 24-hour race, and he and Jerry Marshall became legends. And, of course, the English drivers come here to Bathurst, and they all seek to win that, because that's really the pinnacle, I think, for many of them.
Bathurst is renowned as probably...
So on a world touring car stage, Phil, you see that as the touring car race worldwide, Bathurst? Is the #1 race?
But that track, I think, is acknowledged as probably the best racetrack in the world. The only other one that's probably similar is Spa. Yeah. But Spa's different, much more fast flowing. But Bathurst up and down the mountain, what have you, and virtually every overseas driver that comes here, when they first run around, go, hang on, this is difficult, because all they see is on TV, which flattens it out. And when you're there and you actually see how steep and that it is. Yeah.
And then when they find out that 20 years ago there wasn't even a guardrail around the top, that sort of opens their eyes a bit.
And just again, Andrew, your thoughts. Have you got a favourite race that Peter won or possibly didn't finish, but you thought, boy, that was fantastic?
My favourite race of his, I've got a couple, but there was one at Bathurst in '85 that he broke down with 3 laps to go. I thought that was one of his best drives.
Jag with a broken seat.
And he had the windscreen kicked out, the front and the rear windscreen kicked out. So that was, I thought he drove, that was one of his best drives. It was a race at Lakeside in 1983 where he lapped the whole field in the wet, which I thought, like, you got Moffat, Grice, Johnson, all there, lapped the whole field in the wet. That's just unbelievable. And I did like '87 Bathurst with the, I think I brought it up before, on slicks in the wet.
Yeah.
Driving around with one arm on the window.
It was interesting that year because I was in the pits that year and mixing with the international drivers. Yeah. And because it was being televised, you know, inside the pits, so you could catch the comments of all the overseas drivers as they watched him doing this, because he went out in the wet on the basis that it would dry out, in fact, and he'd get grip, but he had no grip when he started.
Yeah. Peter used to, for him to put wets on, he wouldn't do it. He'd go, it's okay. Slicks will be fine.
It's always going to dry out, you know.
Yeah, keep going, though.
Yeah, but it was really fantastic listening to the comments of the overseas drivers who were, you know, had won their Le Mans 24 hours and Spa 24 hours, watching the thing going, well, this guy's really amazing, because they've been out there in the wet and it's scary. I mean, I haven't driven, Phil can tell you how scary it is. I've driven around the track as a, you know, slow and in the wet, it's just scary. But he's held in the highest regard, for sure.
People still talk about that race today, and just that the last 20 laps of that. Yeah. Just saying how amazing it was and his control. Yeah. And
I get the best event that he ever won really was the Repco Round Australia trial. Just as much as anything, because prior to it, all the chat was going, oh, he's just a circuit races. He won't last. And what they didn't know, because where we brought up in Hurstbridge, there was a lot of dirt roads in those days. So he had a pretty good affinity to it, but it was a bit of a bee in his bonnet going, hang on, I can show these blokes. And bloody hard event, but yeah, it's exceptional.
He didn't. I think that round Australia was the toughest round Australia that they've run.
Oh,
I think
by
it
far.
was like he didn't have much sleep, like 2 hours a day on average or something like that. That's just nuts. And for the 3 Holdens that came 1, 2, 3, and that was a pretty amazing achievement.
So given what we've just spoken about, the enduro Peter Brock, the rally-based Peter Brock, the tarmac-based Peter Brock, the OS Peter Brock, which was the best Peter Brock? Which form of road racing, car racing, motorsport was Peter Brock at his best?
I reckon driving Bathurst.
I think it depends who you ask. I mean, really, everyone would have their own take on that.
I mean, he also ran an open wheeler, a Barana, which was a Formula 2 car, an Australian Formula 2 car, which the year before Leo Gagan had run and won the Australian title in it. Pete didn't get the results that year, but every track he went to he was faster than what Leo Gagan was the year before in that car. Now, it's normally sort of perceived to go, hey, well, you know, you're an open wheeler driver or you're a sedan car driver, whatever. I don't think there's any favourites with Pete. He'd drive the bloody lot. Now,
including that little jigger behind you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What's the history with that little? What's the history with that little one?
The extra one?
Yeah. Run me through that.
Oh, look, it was interesting actually. Lou and I were talking. There was a comment made saying, that Pete's later on, when we talked about like the V8 Supercar era, that he wasn't quite technically correct driving those cars. And it's an interesting comment because if you just jump in like the FE Holden out there, you jump in that and then just jump in let's say about a 79 VB Commodore and then jump in a current VE Commodore, just standard road cars. Just drive it and notice the difference in the suspension, and you drive them totally differently. And Peter went through 40 years of totally different race cars, from his, well, the Austin 7, but then the A30 that he first actually raced, and then right through to the last, which is the VR.
Yeah.
In as far as Bathurst goes. Totally different types of cars. And there was probably, let's say that's 4 errors, and about 3 out of those 4 errors, he was unbeatable.
Well, I can tell you, Phil, that he raced the GTS Monaro, the GDR XU1, the L34 Tirana, the A9X, then the VC, the VH, the VK, the VL Commodores. He then went on to the BMW M3, the Ford Sierra RS500, the VN, the VP, the VR, the VS, the VX, the VZ Commodores.
Yeah.
Is that all?
That's all. That's all I've got him down for.
Yeah, but, and, you know,
aside from Austins and the odd Volvo, and sadly, I think, to the great dismay of many punters, not the Lada Samara. Now, why didn't the Lada Samara ever make its way to Bathurst?
Well, you've got to remember that Russia was still approaching glasnost then, and it was considered, you know, really a capitalist cop-out for them to support motor racing, so it didn't happen. No, I'm just kidding, all right? That poor little thing would not pull the skin off a rice pudding, as they say.
How on earth did the Brock name find its way to be in conjunction with or associated with Lada?
Cash flow, it's called.
Survival.
Cash flow.
Well, we spoke of cash flow earlier. Well, tell me this tale of survival.
When we were faced with the situation of not being able to access base Holden cars to build Brock Commodores in 1997.
Why couldn't you access them?
Because Holden had decided to not continue with their business relationship with Peter Brock.
Based on the polariser?
No, smokescreen. They wanted the business. Holden wanted to either be part of their business or have their own business, which Peter wasn't prepared to sell. And they had to go about it in a way that they couldn't afford really to have Peter's competition there. But the polariser was a smokescreen. There's advertising programs out like that you can get from a Holden dealer at least 12 months prior to that had mentioned in there, which was at a Holden dealership, mentioned in there Peter Brock's Energy polariser. So the polariser had absolutely nothing to do with it.
So all of a sudden, Lewis, you find yourself connected with Lada.
Yes.
By the way, I think Philip is essentially right. It was business. Business with Brock was they couldn't get to an agreeable working situation with HDT. Peter wasn't prepared to enter into a joint venture with them. They wanted the business, and in the end, you do whatever means can be done. You know. So we ended up.
That's politically very well said, look.
We had no cars to work on. We couldn't get the volume of cars. We had orders. The orders were coming out.
Had you hidden cars? I heard a rumour that
all sorts of things.
Cars were hidden.
We would sneak people up to Sydney, and we'd buy them from dealers, and we wouldn't tell them they were going down to the Brock factory. We had guys going all over Australia getting cars and shipping them back, and we'd do them and not tell Holden that they'd been modified, and hopefully the warranty will be okay. In the end, it was just not. You can't run a business like that.
But there were race cars hidden for a period of time, were there not?
Oh, there were. Yeah, yeah.
One of those race cars obviously wasn't the Lada Samara, so I'll allow you to get back to that story.
Okay, the Lada Samara.
And the Neva, Lewis.
And the Neva. Now there's that vehicle. Yep. What we did.
Did they come with a hat? Did you get a free hat with the flaps? Did that come with the?
I wish I did, but the vodka certainly came with the job. I'll say that. We did the pre-delivery. Okay, they were bringing the Neva in, and they probably were bringing in 500, 800 a year. So we had that pre-delivery job. We would fit radios, and it was just cash work to keep our guys occupied and employed. We didn't want to lay people off. We just wanted to try and trade through this problem, and then, you know, change the company direction and move on. And Peter was very committed. I mean, in the end, he poured a lot of money into just wages and maintaining the structure in the hope that we could do that. They released the Lada Samara, the one you refer to in such a derogatory manner, and it was it was based on a Volkswagen Golf, but it was not as good as the Golf. I'll tell you an interesting thing about it. When you got the handbook for the Lada Samara, and I don't want to put down any of the proud owners today, but if you look at your handbook, you'll see this. If you want to do an oil change it had a 5-speed gearbox. If you're going to do an oil change, you have to jack the car up on an angle so that you can release the plug. This is after draining, so you can release the plug and fill it up high enough to cover 5th gear, which was above the drain plug. So you couldn't top up the gearbox without jacking the car up.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I don't know why they just didn't change the casing, but that's what they were like.
And how would you start one of these cars?
With a key.
Well, I'm not sure that's the case.
I think what Glenn's referring to is a myth that was around the Lada area.
Maybe Glenn actually had one.
I think he had one, and I think
I've got a couple in the garage.
I'll tell you the one he got.
He's waiting till the price goes up.
Exactly.
This is the one he got, right? There was one that we got which came on a Russian freighter. It pulled into Port Melbourne, and they stack them door to door like there's no room. The door handles are touching. They dump all the keys in one car, and then to get them out, you go back through and unlock them. So we go and help the Russian seamen unload these cars. And we had one we couldn't start. We towed it back, got it back to the workshop, and the guys were just all over it trying to work out the problem. And he pressed in the cigarette lighter, and the engine started.
Like, fantastic.
You've got to remember that in Russia...
That's how the Anne's Monaro started, yeah. I'm sure.
in Russia...
The 007 model.
Yeah, that's right. In Russia at that time, there was no... being a communist country, there was no consumer competition at all. You know, they didn't have to make it good or bad. And if you got it, you were thankful, right? Well, the quality reflected that. I'm sure they've improved today since the Russian mafia's gotten in charge.
I'm sure they have too. I'm sure they have improved immensely. Let me share a quote with you. Too difficult, really. I mean, it was going to cost me $750,000 to get a scientific validation of it, and I didn't have it. I said, look, can you just trust the fact that it does work? And most of the journalists said, yeah, this works. Good. And that's Peter Brock talking about the energy polariser.
Yeah. It still works.
Devil's advocate, did it work, did it not work? I throw it out to the entire group.
Oh, well, I'll finish off.
Please.
Yes, I think it worked. I had one on a VC Commodore with no power steering back then, and it was not... My wife, actually, found it just nicer and easier to drive, nicer to drive. It didn't go faster. It just felt a bit lighter, a bit smoother, not so much road noise and so on. Phil?
There was a car, we had a VL Commodore, like a demo car. And every time I drove it, and it had a polariser in it, and every time I drove it, it had a rattle in the dash. Which I used to say to people, I try and get someone to have a look at it, whatever, could never fix it. Say to people, that thing's got a rattle in the dash. No, it hasn't. Yes, it has. No, it hasn't. Jump in the car, I'd be in the passenger seat, you drive, no rattle in the dash. You get out, go away. I'd take it for a drive, rattle in the dash. So I don't know. That's about what I know of the Polo. But I did hear from a lot of people, with some said they believed it worked, others believed it didn't.
Was that a point in time where the general public, well, before I go on, did you ever travel in a car, either of you, that had a polariser? Have you got a thought on the polariser?
Never travelled in one. From the outside, I guess I'm sceptical, but I think Peter always used to say, how do we know how a light bulb works, or other things like that? He used to say, like, I don't know how a lot of technical things work, and who am I to say whether this works or it hasn't? I haven't driven one with one in the car, so I can't sort of judge. So,
Anne?
I don't know whether any of the competition cars I competed with Peter in had or didn't have.
No, they
Doubt
wouldn't
it.
have. No, he said it's too hard an environment, like in a race car.
They're running
Yeah.
to work, yeah.
So I guess I don't really have an opinion because it's not something I'm fully up on.
I will try and I'll get one for you and have a try.
Okay.
They're hard to
Would it
find.
work in my golf
Well,
ball?
you know where you get them? You go to a wrecking yard with Lada Nevas in it. Seriously, and you take it off the Lada Neva.
But
they were
we
fitted
put
to
them on
Lada
hundreds
Nevas?
of them, yeah. Not the Samaras, no. Come on, Glenn, we can't put them on a Samara. Nothing will fix a Samara.
Exactly right, exactly right. Well, I'll tell you where you probably could find one. You'd find one for somewhere between maybe $750 and $1,200, and that's on eBay.
Yeah.
I am staggered at the amount of Brock-related products that find their way to eBay. Have you got any thoughts around that?
Well, there's two levels of this, Glenn, and I think that it's fair to say that if an individual or a company puts out something which is clearly for their profit and they do it in a mass way and they enter into the market in that way, then they are most likely using the intellectual property of the estate of Peter Brock or the estate or the foundation, Peter Brock Foundation, and really they're depriving them of income. If a person owns something, and it might be something that Peter's signed, and you get it framed up and you want to sell it, you've got every right to do that. And I just think you have to distinguish. It's pretty easy to judge people, but sometimes people do it because they're short of a quid, but that's very different from taking advantage of a commercial opportunity where, especially shortly after his passing, where there wasn't really the means of policing it. And there is now. From now on, or even since past months, people are questioned about it and, will be prosecuted, to be honest, if they do it.
Phil, you look like you've got a thought.
Oh, no, it just shows the fame of the guy, I guess. The fact that there's so much out there, yeah, but it's just like a whole chapter of eBay as Peter Brock stuff. But it's good as well. I said to a kid when the last time's Pete was in Darwin at a race meeting, and as usual he was there signing the autographs, and there was a queue 100 miles long, and there's a kid about 3 away from Pete, and I said, "Excuse me, mate." He's gone, "Yeah." I said, "You might get the last one." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You might get the last autograph, because he's got RSI." He said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah, so, just you could have the lucky one." Because, Peter must have signed millions.
Didn't you have a deal with a texter company or something, or a pen?
Sharpie.
Yeah, because he signed so many.
Did he carry a wad of texters
Oh,
with
yeah.
him?
Yeah. All the different colours.
A rubber
and
band or a
all that
zip-up
stuff,
bag with
And
it.
a silver one, just
Very
in case he had to
organised.
sign something black.
Yeah, he's very
Black
organised.
one in case he had to sign something white.
And you were in charge of it, Anne, right?
I was for a while,
Well,
yes.
that looks like a signature up on the plasma here in the studio, and an 05 Commodore there. Was there a particular car that really stands out to each of you as the Peter Brock car, the one he will be best remembered as driving?
I like the '84 Big Bangers VK. That's just my personal favourite. And the A9X in '79, they'd be my two, I think, but that's just personal opinion.
Anne?
Mine are, I mean, I was born in 1972, so the car that's behind me I think is a 73, but that's what I really remember from Bathurst, and it's probably retrospective footage that makes me remember that as being the classic era.
Lewis, you're next in line.
Well, I was going to go for the 72 as well because I love the paint job. I just think it's great. But I'll bounce back to the A30, I think, in deference to Anne. And, you know, that was just not so much a beautiful car, but an extremely effective car, which I think had 102 wins in 2 years. I mean, you just can't believe the success. Won the Australian Sports Sedan Championship and was built in our chook shed. You know, that's got a lot of pretty funny memories. Actually, that was pretty
had a few
annoying.
Samara bits on it, actually.
It would have. And two polarisers.
We sacrificed our table tennis area actually for Peter to do that.
Yeah.
And we
didn't have a lot of choice either.
No, we weren't compensated. We weren't. He just said, "I'm building a car in here. You'll have to get that somewhere else."
You have to speak to my counsellor about something else now.
What about you, Phil? Did you have a favourite car?
No.
I imagine that the car that had Brock adorned across the windscreen potentially would be a favourite of yours.
Well, both those actually, the 76 and 77 car. Yeah, but for me, the question was sort of on.
Of course.
Favourite car that Peter drove? No, I really don't. There's bits out of each one that were of excellence or whatever. Yeah. So no real favourite that I saw him drive as much as some of his better drives as such. Yeah.
I think my personal favourite, I'm with Andrew in the sense of the A9X. Now, I remember as a youngster running out the front of my house in the middle of the night with my parents' consent.
Does this anything to do with motor racing?
It does. We all ran out the front. We were a strange family, but we'll talk about your family in a moment too. We ran to the front fence and I noticed the getaway car of a particular robbery that was committed where I grew up in Strathmore on the local newsagents. And the family was baffled. What sort of car was it? And I just remember the big bolt-on flares. So I knew it was a Tirana. I knew it was a hatchback. Probably wasn't an A9X, may have been. If I had that car today, I'd be a rich man. But the crooks of the day had taken this Tirana and robbed the local news agency, and we, as a family, we waved them goodbye. And when the police came along, we gave them the report of the particular car. And my knowledge of that car was based on watching Peter fly about in that particular car. And I think any time I see those bolt-on flares, and we have a Tirana here in the backdrop, I feel quite stirred, to be quite honest. I feel very passionately towards that particular car, and again, rare as hen's teeth. Many of them probably would have been scrapped after you raced them, and would that have been the case? Yep. So scrapped, and again today in today's marketplace, Andrew, you know your facts and figures, you could probably put a figure on an A9X. What would I pay for a good A9X?
A good, what, like a, I don't know. I wouldn't. Have no idea for a good A9X actually.
You start for a road car.
For a road car.
You're starting at a decent one, probably starting at 150. To be honest.
That's Anne, as they would say, that's Anne Gigny type money.
And getting back to those cars. See, as you went year to year, like there was such a difference in each different car that it was. Once you got the new one, I'll throw the old one away because then you're going to get a far better car. Like from the L34 to the A9X was a vast improvement on the suspension side of it. When you got to the Commodores, it was probably less of a difference. In fact, from 79 to 84, there wasn't a huge difference. It really came to the race team that actually built a better car, if you know what I mean, made the real difference there. Yeah.
Just very briefly, run me through the BMW campaign, the Volvo campaign, Lewis. Why were these campaigns taken? The Sierra campaign, was it simply the break from Holden and the need to find a car to punt about a track?
It was really. I think that, and Andrew, I might need your help here, but I think that the first one was BMW.
Yeah.
And the reason it was BMW, well, firstly, 1987, that car that won that race, the one we referred to earlier where Peter goes into the last stint with slick tyres and the wet and power slides up the mountain, fishtailing and things like that. That car was we'd already lost all engineering support from Holden. When I say we, HDT Racing. So we had 2 cars entered, 05 and 10. 05 was built with the best we could come up with, given limited resources, and certain resources were shut down. Car 10 was built, basically it was a second-hand car. It was built by an apprentice, and we were there. We built the car because we had sponsorship commitments. And that was nowhere near as good as car 05, but 05 died. We jumped in 10 and Peter subsequently won the race in it, which was a miracle. And for us, very emotional, because we felt like we'd had a really rough year. It was really tough. The BMW team was already in existence. The cars existed. It was a matter of doing a deal with, I think, Ron Beecham from BMW, and we could just walk into the cars. It was pretty simple.
The Sierra?
Sierra was a couple of, from memory, they were Wolf...
Rouse. I think they're Andy Rouse ones.
Andy Rouse cars. Yeah.
But the BMW in the year the race of BMW was just hopelessly uncompetitive against the Sierras.
Yeah.
Sierra was the Samara-like.
Yeah. Actually, the Sierra, the car, Peter really enjoyed the Sierra.
A lot of people didn't like driving it.
Actually, an amazing car.
A lot of people didn't like driving the Sierra, but he never had a problem with it.
Oh, it's because it came on with such a rush,
and
with the
skinny,
turbo.
had skinny tyres on it for the power it had too, really.
Yeah.
So.
Was there ever a chance that he would have defected to Ford?
Well,
permanently?
Yeah, there was a chance. There was a chance. Hey, can I tell a Peter Brock joke?
Please.
Okay. It was during the BMW year, right? And it was just so depressing. It was pathetic. He just couldn't win anything. He drove his bum off. A bit like when you drove that HQ race with Peter. But anyway, we're driving up the highway to go up to Winton. And he pulls out past a Suzuki and pulls by it and gets in front of it. And he says, "That's the first time I passed a Sierra all year." I mean, it was completely spontaneous. Right? It was like, Peter was like that, wasn't he? He suddenly came out with the funniest things. Yeah, but that was the Sierras. And the Sierras
a couple
were
of years in there, in the Ford. A couple of years in the Sierra, I think.
Yeah.
He had...
But Peter built Ford road cars as well. And if that had blossomed, it would have blossomed. And it's not... I mean, he was into more universal values than Holden or Ford. He was into excellence, getting the best out of himself, getting the best out of a motor vehicle, putting the best components, making it as good as it could be. So really it could have worked on anything. That's why he could go and talk to Olympic athletes, as simply as he could talk to an artist. Because he was working with universal values, I think. And it even applies to Ford. And probably Lada. Maybe not.
But not football teams, mate.
It's been a challenge.
I'm going to throw up a few names and you can give me some thoughts. The first one is a pretty obvious one, Alan Moffat.
Moff was obviously the huge nemesis, but we hated Moff in those days as part of the race.
Did Peter hate him?
Hey?
Did Peter hate him?
No.
No?
I don't think he ever really hated anyone. But the pit crew did, because he would win.
They're giving him a bit of this one.
And yeah, exactly.
Thumbs down.
But I think Moff also, in general terms, Moff was not a clean driver early on.
Don't stop, Phil. Don't stop. But there's a diary entry in there, I think, about Alan Moffat.
Alan had to work extremely hard at his driving. He was not a natural driver, and we all had the utmost respect for that. Because, I mean, sometimes he would sit in the car for half an hour or something before a race and just windows up and just sit there and just get his brain into what he was going to do. But he needed to do that to go out and do what he did. And we always had the utmost respect for that, and I know Peter did. But when Peter and Alan drove together, Moffat was as clean a driver as anyone. And they never touched paint. There was a race meeting that I went to in Perth in '72, when Pet was in the car, the XU1, and Moffat in the GTHO. And the last 5 laps, Moffat had got away in the distance, and then Pete gradually clawed him back, and the track there was very abrasive, so tyre wear was a real problem. As it got towards the end, they got sort of close together, and the finish of the race, Moffat actually won, but probably about half a car length over Peter. The whole front of Peter's car, all the glass was smashed and everything, not through hitting or whatever, but just they were running off the road that much, and the amount of gravel and what have you just smashed the headlights and what have you. And the crowd just hang around for ages after that, just getting autographs and what have you. And Moff, in that respect, you went, yeah, he was good, but I mean, just initially you didn't like him because he might win.
What about down Targa way, Anne? Someone like Jim Richards?
I think I don't know about motor racing, but certainly in the rally world, there's a mutual respect amongst the rally drivers. But of course, once you put your helmet on, it really is a different scenario, and I think that's the same as motor racing. So Jim was a very, very tough competitor in Targa, and he was not going to give an inch. You know, we made a mistake, then we made a legitimate mistake that Jim would cash in on, and you know, that's racing, that's fair. Yeah, so I don't think Peter had an issue with that. It's just the way racing was.
So, Lewis, what have you found in the 1975 diary of
It's
one
actually a
Peter
diary
Brock?
entry for the 28th, I'm not sure what month, where it must have been a co-appearance. It would have been probably a pre-Bathurst press conference, I would say. So,
With Alan Moffat?
yes, but it would have been arranged probably by the promoters. You know, it might have been Bathurst or Sandown, and they come along to promote the event. And that was about the extent of the social contact back then, right? Because there wasn't any. But in later years, it really changed. I mean,
Well, we've got some of this sort of memorabilia tucked away.
yeah.
I mean, Phil, is that how you saw it? Were they enemies who became mates? Were they two people who didn't really know each other? I'll leave that with you. You
Oh, look,
can hold on to that.
I don't know what
Did they learn to
became.
love each other?
No,
Respect each other?
Respect. There's always a respect there. And I think that when I was saying before about on the track, you know, they didn't touch each other. And that is respect. I mean, and that was one of the things Peter was known for anyway. But later on, when Moff no longer had his Ford or Mazda sponsorship, Peter was only too happy to get him on his team to race, which I thought was a pretty good effort of Pete's behalf to do that. Yeah, surprised the hell out of a lot of people. They couldn't believe it. Yeah.
What did you think of that, Lewis?
I was there when that happened. It's 85, Andrew?
6.
6? I'm really glad he's here. Okay,
He
he's
has
really
been
good.
very, very
and
good.
it was fantastic, actually. I mean, it was a big surprise, but he was also really happy to be there. And in later years, with the growth of the Peter Brock Foundation, Alan's been very supportive of that. And also, Peter gave him an opportunity for promotion through that, and you know, I think they did become pretty good mates.
Let me share another quote for you, if you will. I thought Craig winning the first year of the Peter Brock Trophy was very appropriate. They grew up in the same area. Peter was a mentor to Craig, and you saw the emotion in Craig all day. He had a sincere and special connection to Peter. Of course, Lewis, you shared that comment. Craig Lowndes, Peter Brock, good mates?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned earlier on that he played for the same footy team that we did,
In the
although he was a
reserves.
generation
You
younger.
sank the boot there, the
Yeah,
reserves.
I did
Danny.
say that in the seconds, but you didn't need to bring that up again.
Well, we might have to edit it out twice now. So.
But they, Peter, I think, when Peter was probably ending the latter period of his V8 supercar career, Craig was showing success and obviously destined to be a person who'd have many wins. That Peter did take on the role of encouraging and helping him every way we could. And they did subsequently separate off, but it was really nice to see that happen. And it's true, when you see a person with the emotion that Craig felt, about Peter's passing, that was very touching, I thought. It made him feel like family in a lot of ways.
And I'm just curious, we just heard about a relationship between Peter and Craig Lowndes and the stories about Brock Moffat, etc., etc. How does a young woman from Tasmania end up in a car with Peter Brock hurtling around a Targa course or an alternative event? How does Peter Brock come calling?
I've always wondered the same myself, Anne.
Well, you could just ask for the phone number.
Well, that could be an invitation, but that would be an entirely different DVD, wouldn't it?
When I actually worked for Brad Jones with the Audi racing team, and Cameron McConville was the second driver, or we'll call him the second driver, in that team. And I said to Cameron at the time, you'd actually be quite good on the rally circuit. Maybe we should have a go. Let's call up Audi and see if they'll do it. And he kind of went, yeah, it sounds like a great idea, and of course it never happened, and that was about 95 or 96. And when the Monaro team came up, and they were also running the little Astra, of course Cameron said, oh, that's fantastic, I'm really pleased to be part of the team. I've got this co-driver who I think will be really, really good, and her name's Anne Gigney. And Peter goes, oh yes, I've heard that name before. And so he got my phone number off Cameron or someone, and he called me up. And of course, when Peter called, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was some fellow just giving me a call and playing a joke. It's not every day that Peter Brock calls you up and says, hey, come rally with me. Hold on, let me just think about that.
For a second.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
So you thought it was a practical joke?
I did, and I was thinking, who would be able to carry that off enough to make it a practical joke? And then I thought, no, actually, it's kind of sounding a little bit like Peter Brock. He's kind of saying all the right things, and I was kind of playing it really cool. Oh yes, that sounds great. Yep. Okay, let me get back to you.
I think you would have been very excited. Well, let's jump from one practical joke to another, because I'm very interested in knowing the lowdown on the day a spaceship crashed into Peter Brock's backyard. Can you run me through that story?
I don't really like practical jokes, and I feel very sympathetic to Peter, that he was humiliated on national TV by people close to him. I think it was very unfair, so...
I have never seen...
I would hate that to happen to me. How would you like that?
I've never seen the footage, Lewis. I do not know what happened. I need you to paint a picture for me. All I know is that Peter was in bed early, fast asleep, and unbeknownst to him, friends from another planet dropped by and left part of their spaceship in his backyard.
Well, when llamas and all sorts of
Yes,
animals.
There were llamas.
Yeah.
I actually asked him after that, because he was excited. Then and then he realised the whole thing was a practical joke. And I went up to him and asked him, "How did you feel when you found out it was a practical joke?" And you know what he said? He said, "I was really disappointed. It would have been so good." And that's kind of what he was like. It wasn't going to be, but practical jokes. There's a barbed edge there, isn't there, I think?
There can be.
But he had his red hot go too.
Yes, he did. He probably deserved it, I mean.
Well, he was seen as an alternative man.
Yeah.
I certainly must put my cards on the table and say that I didn't see him as an alternative man, but then people say that I'm, of course, alternative in my own way of thinking. I guess it's anyone who steps outside the norm, but we've got diet, lifestyle, in terms of health and fitness, and he was people were always commenting about his well-being, considering his age and so forth. And again, I don't see that as anything more than somebody looking after themselves. Energy polarisers, these sorts of things, innovations in ways of thinking, philosophy. Was he truly an alternative man, or was that just Peter Brock being Peter Brock?
Alternative. He was very diverse in his thinking, and he was very open to...
Always, or was that something that developed?
No, always. His whole life. Definitely. I mean,
and
he was
he
always
was penalised? Was he penalised for that, Lewis?
Well, yeah. The business interests with Holden was probably the biggest penalty, but also it won him many great respect, you know, because he was non-judgmental. I mean, he was as open to talking to you as to a person from a completely different station. It didn't matter to him, and you mentioned that, right? That's what it was like. When you're with him, he doesn't care whether he talks to the company director or the little kid or even the homeless person. You know, that's what he's like, and that's just and he's also like that in thinking about the possibilities of life, of science. You know, what's possible. I mean, an energy polarizer is a fantastic idea. It's great that he was prepared to have the guts to try and make it work. That's how I see it. And if we're not sure yet, well, heck, we should find out. You know, someone should continue with the work.
750 grand's worth. We'll see what we can come up with. We'll raise some money.
We might just... I'm trying to get...
You're looking at it?
Get more polarisers, absolutely.
All right.
Because people want them. Well, look what they're worth on eBay.
Well, exactly right. We'll start a polariser factory. Forget about Ian Tate's workshop. We will turn this workshop into a polariser factory. Ian Tate, Australian motor mechanic guru, out the door. We're turning this side into a polariser factory.
Well, you know, magnetics are now used in suspension systems, in shockers. Okay, so we're dealing with very similar energies here. It's 20 years earlier, probably more primitive, but we're still dealing with similar energies.
What would have happened, hypothetically, if Alan Moffat had invented or instated the energy polariser? What do you think, Phil? Would people have accepted it more from Alan Moffat?
No.
No?
No.
Simple as that, no.
Oh, well, they wouldn't. Sorry, I mean, Peter was look, Peter survived quite a few business catastrophes. I mean, money didn't affect Peter at all. It was a means to an end. And his end was going motor racing because that was his passion, which is an expensive thing to do. So that was what all that money was about. And when you were saying before about sort of being, what was it, disadvantaged or something of the way he lived his life, in business dealings it was reasonably often. There was quite a few people who have used Peter over the years for their own profit. Which sometimes annoyed the crap out of me, because a person normally who's achieved what he achieved over those years would have been a very, very rich man when he passed away, and Peter wasn't. In fact, if it wasn't for Lou, he wouldn't have been as well off as what he was, and he certainly wasn't well off in the terms we normally think that is. But just in getting back to your reference about the polariser with Alan Moffat, Moffat was the second most respected driver in Australia. If you barracked for a Ford, you respected him. But Peter was by far the most respected, and as I said before at Bathurst last year, the people I spoke to weren't just Holden supporters. Didn't matter who they barracked for, Peter Brock was just one exceptional person. And I've never been able to quite put the word on it, but some of the people I spoke to, I mean, he changed their lives by speaking to them for 5 minutes. You know, and they would remember something that he said to them and just not forget it. And that every time they came to a hard decision, they would remember that and live life that way. And that doesn't happen if you're talking to just someone who was good at kicking a footy or driving a motor car. He was just something a bit different.
That's interesting, because there was a guy who I met, this is the same day as Phil's talking about, which is Saturday Bathurst 2006. And I was up on the mountain, and a guy came up and said, I just want to tell you a story about my encounter with Peter Brock. And I said, please go ahead. And he said he'd been diagnosed 2 years earlier with leukemia, and it was life-threatening. And he was, he'd just been diagnosed, then he met Peter, right? and they talked, and this isn't about touching someone and healing them. The conversation they had was that basically, if you really believe in yourself, if you have the confidence that you can deal with this, then you can go through the treatment, you can come out the other end cured. But you've got to cure yourself, you've got to believe it yourself. And it was that emphasis on self-belief. Well, 2 years later, I'm talking to the guy who said, I went through treatment and I'm okay. There's no further sign of it. And that's a self-confidence thing, you know, and that's the gift he could pass on, and I'm sure did to lots of people. I mean, we keep hearing it all the time. It's extraordinary, you know.
Well, you mentioned earlier with that trophy again.
Yeah, well, it is. It's exactly the same.
Stepped up to the mark after winning that trophy without basically batting an eyelid to accept the interview and perform under pressure.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing set of circumstances that one man could have that self-belief. Is that something as a fan that you felt Peter Brock had, Andrew? Could you feel that self-belief, that determination?
Yeah, he always had a lot of, I think he had a lot of confidence in his own ability. And his outlook on life, I've tried to sort of model myself, I guess, on his philosophies, and like, he's always been a very positive person, and I've tried to do that. So if something bad happens, you know, you try and get on with it, and yeah, if I think one of the things he said was talking about basically just being positive about everything. That's what I take away from it, and I pass it on. I'm a tennis coach, and I try and pass it on to kids. At the end of the day, you know, it's just a tennis match. It's not worth sort of getting that frustrated about, and there's bigger things in life to be worrying about than that. So that's what I sort of try and model myself off with life like that. So yeah.
I think his best statement was, don't waste your energy on negativity.
Yeah.
And we all do so often, and it's a thing that you just think of and immediately can change the way you think about something, and it's bloody important. Yeah, so yeah, that, I mean, he had heaps of sayings, but to me I thought that one sort of rings more true the whole time.
Well, there was a very difficult time that everybody associated with Peter Brock, whether they be close family or peripheral members of the community, had to go through, and that was the time of his passing. And I remember myself thinking that Steve Irwin, the Croc, Peter Brock, the Brock, and potentially Dame Edna, the Frock. I thought there might be a rule of three there. We could lose three great icons of this nation like that. But it's funny, when Peter passed, and it really stirred the pot in terms of my own heart, I did see a real positive in it, and I could remember the meetings we'd had, the encounters we'd had, the times we'd shared, and that feeling that you mentioned, Andrew, that although this is a terribly trying time, there will be a great positive come from it, or come through it at the other end, a pot of gold, if you like, at the other end of the rainbow. Lewis, how did you and the family push through that time?
I did actually, and I have since, called on the kind of things that Peter talked about, the way he lived his life. I mean, he was just a great example, and I was very fortunate to spend the last 2 years of his life I spent with him working and socially. So it was just great to get back after, you know, brothers go all these separations and differences, and to spend that time. So, and I was amazed at his energy, and what Andrew Gay said is perfectly true. His energy levels were way beyond mine. I mean, he wore me out, but he would put things together which would amaze you, like that car to Goodwood. There's a picture of it here somewhere, the early model Holden that we went to Goodwood last year.
It was actually the last lapboard from his racing career. This is the last lapboard from Goodwood. Wow. Unfortunately, minus the numbers.
Yeah.
But they were stolen apparently on the trip back to Australia. They went missing somewhere on the plane or through transit, but that is the last lapboard of Peter Brock's career.
Well, I watched that car be materialised, shall we say, because really it started as a thought, and then as an idea, and then he got together the key people, and they had no money. There was no financial plan, no business plan. Peter didn't work on that. He worked on, now this is a good idea, let's do it. And then he'd get all the people infected, and it was like a virus, and they'd all get infected, and then they'd start doing it, and then the car materialised, and we've got photos of it being built over at Phil Mundy's workshop, and I mean, coping with what happened, I think, is as soon as he was gone, it's like, okay, what can we draw from him to help us move on? And I do that. I have to say now, I still think, what would Peter do? It's a good reference. I know people do that with anyone that they respect, don't they? Because you think, your mentors or something, right? But he was very good at dealing with adversity. Phil's right. He had some disasters in his life, and you really wouldn't know it, Andrew, would you? I mean...
Oh, the public face, I don't know about privately, but the public face you always see is just Mr. Positivity all the time.
And he always was. He just saw it as an experience and a challenge which he'd learn and grow and move on. And if you do it that way, you're not hurt by it.
What did you learn from Peter's passing?
Well, it was, I still remember the day clearly, and I think my father rang me and told me, and then my phone was just going off, so all my mates were ringing and saying,
"Have you were at work or?"
On my way to work, so I had to coach that night, and that was a bit of a struggle, and got through that. And I suppose what I sort of thought about was, would he want me, you, everyone here to be upset about his passing? Yeah. That's the way I sort of looked at it, and definitely not. Yeah. Okay, move on. I think Crompton said that at the in the eulogy at the funeral. Yeah. He was very well spoken then. Yeah, talking about that. And so it was a bad couple of weeks, but because it was between the death and then the funeral, then the Sandown memorial, and I think Bathurst to me was a bit of a closure. Just that meeting. That was an amazing meeting. That I thought it was just. I thought I'd be all right at Bathurst, but I was still struggling to cope there. And just if you see someone else upset, that's what sets me off generally. Yeah. So,
there was a guy today. We had a Parkland event, which was to do in honour of Peter, and a guy came up to me, and he was just a really rugged-looking guy, missing front teeth. He had a nice car, a Brock Commodore. And just
I'll take them out for you later.
From Braybrook, but his family had migrated, from Strathmore to get away from it. And he looked at me and he said, "Can you sign this book?" And I mean, I'm not Peter Brock, but it's the best I can do is say, well, I'm his brother, and I don't know how do you fill that gap? We don't even try. When I was signing the book, he was crying. And this is 1 year later, crying. So, there's a lot of people out there who've just been touched.
I think the thing that I sense when people talk to me, they say, "Oh, gee, you're really lucky to have had that experience," which I know. I'm lucky to have been in the car. Is that Peter almost is, he won't ever go, he won't ever disappear, because he's so ingrained into the memories of all of us who grew up with motorsport, and from my point of view, I still think all the time, I'll give Peter a call. Oh, is this really exciting thing? I'll just give Peter a call. And I'm sure that the whole world of motorsport out there feels the same way.
The Elvis analogy got used this week, I think, about being passed away and how it's getting bigger, if anything.
Yeah.
So,
Phil?
The first 2 weeks was pretty amazing. It brought the three Rain brothers together. We were all in Melbourne, and we had to help organise the state funeral and the tribute at Sandown and what have you. And it sort of seemed to take, well, it was about 2 weeks roughly, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, and there was no bickering, no fighting and what have you, and we tend to have a habit of doing that occasionally, particularly when I'm there. And it was just, that was beautiful. I thought, it helped all us sort of get back together and not that we were that far apart.
Brought out Philip's feminine side.
Yeah, exactly.
I can imagine that being very strong. I've seen his lacy red numbers he's got on now, very, very appealing.
Was that the reason you got sacked from Channel 9?
Exactly right.
I thought it must have been. But in general, it's as Anne says, he'll always be there. And when you're talking about Peter the whole, this weekend, I came down to Melbourne, yesterday's Pete, and today's Pete and what have you, and so it really is no different in that respect. All you don't have is you have that actual chat or physical contact which I was away from Melbourne for 25 years, so that didn't affect me as much as, say, Lou. So I haven't found it that bad in that respect, and he will always be here, so it's fine. I mean, the really interesting thing is when you look back and you get some situations that happened, or whether they be race meetings or just personal dealings with Pete and that, and you analyse it, and you analyse why did you think that way, or why did this happen, and things will clarify, and that I find really great, because you can sort of then understand why things happened here and there, which has been, I find that pretty amazing.
I think Phil's saying that it's healed things. A lot of Phil's relationship with Peter has caused him to go into himself and heal some things. Am I right there?
Totally. Yep. Actually, I'll mention that. I was talking to two ladies yesterday who were at the Hurstbridge Primary School. And they grabbed me and said, Phil, we haven't met you before. We heard you yakking over there before, and we reckon you've got some really good stories to tell. Just sit down for a minute. Okay.
That'd be right.
Anyway, so the interesting thing is, and I think it's been a very pertinent thing with our family, our mother and father had to put up with 4 boys, which is pretty bloody hard. We're all fairly different. And I guess in those days, when we're talking the early 50s, what have you, not very financial, that sort of stuff. And so it was never a touchy-feely sort of a family. It was, we just got to get the job done. Like in the early years, it was a 2-bedroom house with 4 boys in 1 bedroom, like two abreast on a bunk. And I'm certainly not trying to say how poor we were, but it was just that's the way it was. So it was an interesting sort of a scenario. That lack of touchy-feely has been shown in those 4 brothers all their life. Now, Peter, Lewis, Neil and myself would never come up and give each other a hug. We now do it sometimes, but we know we force ourselves to do it because we do want to do it, but it's very difficult. And the reason I'm saying this is that Peter, his main family was his public. That's where he gave his most love, was to people. He had 5 minutes with here, 5 minutes there, whatever, and he gave absolute love, eye contact, said, and gave these lovely little sayings to people in such a short time, and it meant such a lot to them. I only learnt that, really, not only Bathurst, but specifically Bathurst last year. I was thinking for a lot of years that I did not get the recognition for Peter that I thought I deserved when I was trying to do the same thing as Peter. Once all that happened, I understood. I now understand what he's doing. And I was like, hey, all's forgiven, everything's fine. But a very important thing, and I think, that it's been difficult, over a lot of years, but now you go, that's fine. And it's been so good to be able to learn that. It's a bit like, how lucky are we that we had a brother who was in a situation that we can learn that. Imagine if you had a brother or something and he just passed away, and how would you ever learn that? And yet you had the same hurt. So there's a lot of fortunate things that have come out of it through that.
What should we do as a community, Lewis, or even as individuals, to remember Peter? Is there anything in particular we shouldn't do? How would you think he would like us to move forward?
Well, I'd say that the Peter Brock Foundation would be the way to go.
That's it too.
I mean, Peter created that. The reason that the Peter Brock Foundation was created is because when Peter retired from full-time V8 supercar racing in 1997, he had just this massive fan base, and there were clubs, and they were celebrating his career, and Peter saying, well, why don't we do something positive with all this energy? So the foundation was created to channel that energy into charitable works, philanthropic enterprises, and that's still what it is. It's no different today. It's still, and you know about that because you're involved in that, Glenn. So if you want to keep that name and vision, that reputation alive, I would say that that's the best vehicle, is to support the Peter Brock Foundation. And we have a website, peterbrockfoundation.com.au. It's as simple as that. Just go there and see what we're doing, and if you feel like you want to, then just contact us through the website.
Tonight's been about living life, following your dreams, and with that in mind, I'm going to give you a dream opportunity, Andrew, and that is to ask any of these other 3 panel members any question you like. Now, if you happen to step on toes, that's your issue, and I'll allow Big Phil Split Pin to do the number on you. But quite seriously, have you got any question, anything off the cuff that you'd like to throw over to the brothers Brock, or of course Anne, and get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak?
Phil, 83 Bathurst.
Is this, hang on. Is this something that's going to bring Phil to tears?
That's a perfect question.
Do we have to bring your couch in? Will he be okay?
Just, were you peeved off at him for taking your drive?
It's a two-pronged answer. Number one, he didn't take my drive.
Larry did?
Yeah. That was the problem.
Yeah.
This came in the conversation yesterday, and that was a very, very good answer. My thought has been sort of going, well, hang on, I mean, Larry was the team manager as such. I'll just set the scenario. We do practice all the way through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and what have you. Peter's doing roughly about 2 minutes 17 around there on average. John Harvey and I do about 2 minutes 18, and Larry's about 2 minutes 19 and a half. So it's the slowest of the 4 of us. That was very common. We even got Larry in our car just to see. John and I want to know, is it Peter or is it us? Sure enough, it was us. Larry did exactly the same times in our car as he did in Pete's. So when it happened, when Peter jumped, as soon as Peter's car broke down, I knew that he'd be in our car.
Yeah.
I was hoping he would. Hell, he's the best driver out there, like best chance to get a win. When it then came about of Larry jumping in the car, yes, I was pretty upset about it. And just the other day, someone said yesterday, they said, well, hang on, I mean, Peter could have said something to Larry, couldn't he? I said, yeah, well, I guess he could have. He said, but the difference was, you're his brother. It's easier him. He knows he's not going to cop flack off you. Whereas if he says to Larry, hey, you're not going to do the drive, he's going to, oh, I'm not coming to work Monday, I'm not going to be the team manager, what have you. That would have been the easiest decision on Peter's side. And it would be pretty true. But it was, in other words, he could have countermanded Larry pretty easy, but didn't do it. And I understand it. At the time I didn't too much. But I mean, still, it still comes back to it was Larry's decision, and that was just an egotistical decision. That's it.
Good answer. Good answer.
Very good. I'll afford you the same opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to ask of Lewis or Phil relating to Peter, or beyond? If there isn't, that's fine.
I suppose the question maybe to Phil, having driven in the same car team, etc. with Peter, the experience that I had sometimes was like Peter was connected to somewhere else, you know, so he knew what was up the road ahead. Co-driver was almost superfluous in some instances. Did you ever come across that with Peter on the track?
No, really, but I'm an awful passenger. The only person ever that I was comfortable with was Peter. With Peter, I could go faster. I loved it. I loved watching him drive, sitting beside him. I mean, it was just because obviously I was just really thinking what I'd be doing in the same situation. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was in awe of that. Yeah. But
did you know Mick Holmes said the same thing as you just said? That at times he honestly believed that Peter must have been looking around corners the way he drove. Yeah, interesting.
Any final thought, Lewis?
No, appreciate the opportunity. It's good to talk about Peter because he's an uplifting person. So thanks.
Phil, final thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's a compilation of what I said before. The last year has just made me understand that he was just such a different person. I mean, and you know, you go through this. I mean, you know, he does art. He used to design some of the road cars we did. You know, he's a great driver. He's a good speaker, good-looking bloke, and we were very fortunate to be family of his and co-drivers, friends, or whatever. I think it's great.
Well, I feel very fortunate to have listened in on so many intimate thoughts from some very, very special guests. And I'll put you out of your misery, Phil, and let you know that in Ascot Vale, on a street named Kelvin Street, where my grandmother lived, I would run around playing AFL football out on the hard road surface, and I'd run around yelling out Dacos and screaming for Collingwood and going through all the routines that I'd seen on the television from footballing greats of that era. And I remember my father coming out and saying, listen, I need to make this clear to you, that although we're visiting grandmother at grandmother's house and we're making, I guess, one step closer to Collingwood than Essendon where we lived, or Strathmore to be more particular, that in no way, shape or form will you barrack for Collingwood. That must end here and now, and if anything, you have to pretend that you at least barrack for Essendon. So very quickly I started saying Tim Watson and Paul van der Haar and all these other names quickly replaced Peter Dacos. I dare not tell this story with Peter Dacos in the room, so thankfully he has since left us and gone on to his night proper, if you will. But personally, Peter Brock, the name, that'll never be changed in my heart. The man meant an awful lot to me as a role model, as a friend, and I think more than anything as somebody who I admired for his genuine work throughout the community. So unfortunately, mate, I have to tell you, and Lewis, I've replaced Peter Dacos. He will not be coming back into my life, nor will any of the other Collingwood greats of the era. They will be replaced, well, with Tim Watson and the likes of those sorts of names. But Peter Brock will never be replaced in my heart, as I know he won't be in yours. And I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the very best, each and every one of you.
Thank you,
Glenn. Cheers.
It was a pleasure.